This program deals with devil worship and satanic beliefs. It contains explicit scenes and descriptions of violent crimes and rituals.
Americans are asking, who attacked our country?
You have declared a subliminal jihad against the United States. Can you tell us why?
Everything pertaining to what's happening has never come to the surface. The world will never know the true facts of what occurred, my motives.
And night fell on a different world.
And Iblis is thinking, I should be getting this position, not Adam, and this guy is created from dirt.
And how does the army feel about you being head of the Temple of Set?
And the conspiracy theorists can say what they will, but
I want you to give me power over Adam, and I want you to give me soldiers and minions and all of these things.
The people had so much to gain and had such a material motive for putting me in a position I'm in. We'll never let the true facts come aboard to the world.
And I want you to be able to give me the ability to whisper into the hearts of mankind.
And who was the grotto leader? Don't remember his name. You don't remember the name of a person who involved you in murder?
Now these people are in very high positions, yeah? Yes.
Welcome back to Subliminal Jihad, episode 70. I am your co-host, Dimitri.
I'm Khalid.
And today, we're going to do a little book report once again on kind of influential text from the 1970s from our favorite university.
Little book reports, yes. Our favorite research institute at our favorite university.
Yes. I actually don't know if you're referring to the Hoover Institute or the Stanford Research Institute. They're just both so great.
I was talking about the Stanford Research Institute. True. Yeah. Which one is our favorite? It's hard to say, but yeah.
Yeah. SRI doesn't have a William J. Casey fellow, so that's a strike against them, I suppose. But
yeah, true.
But yeah, no, there's a book that has popped up on our radar, I think, at various points. I became aware of it many years ago. It's something that's often mentioned in certain corners of the conspiracy world, and also I think if anybody
I could see this is like very red meat for this type, for like a conspiracy type of thing, for sure. It's very much like something that you could take in all sorts of different directions. I actually hadn't heard of this, but I found it very interesting once you made me aware of it. It's right up my alley in certain ways. Like again, like it's kind of dated. It's weird because it came out like in the mid 70s. This was published by like an assemblage of scholars led by O.W. Markley. It is published in 1974. But it's very much like Levi Strauss, like typical 70s like anthropological, like woo-woo, like Idris Shah type stuff.
Yep. Yeah, Joseph Campbell, we got Margaret Mead.
Joseph Campbell
it's really a greatest hit, a greatest hits of like the mid 20th century Western social engineers and like woo-woo theorists that were hovering around like major institutions.
It's incredibly woo-woo. It's really something. Yeah, it's interesting because it has that kind of like policy recommendation type of thing. They mentioned in the introduction to the edition that we read, which is the Pergamon publishing edition, Pergamon Press.
Sure is.
That came out in I guess 1982, that edition. But yeah, they mentioned that they had trouble getting it published because it's so like weird, because it's like a sort of like white paper almost, but it's something that the premise of it, for one, we're talking about changing images of man, edited, as we said, by O.W. Markey and Willis W. Harmon, but actually collaborative work by a group of scholars, each of them contributing more to various chapters of it. It has a couple of different chapters.
Yes, and it was kind of a collective white paper that resulted from a research project that was administered by the Urban and Social Systems Division of the Stanford Research Institute. And I think the first version of it maybe came out in 1972 or 73.
I think it was 74 that it was,
or maybe it was.
But it was published by Stanford, I think, yeah.
And then it was published in the 80s, like you said, and I actually didn't know this until I started. I had read sections of it before, but I'd never sat down and kind of read mostly the whole thing. But the version we were able to get, I think, from Archive was indeed the Pergamon edition, and it's kind of indicative of some of the I don't know, the appeal of reading this book, if you're into the kind of the stuff that we're into, in that it is just like the absolute maximum rogues gallery of sus individuals, not just in this like woo-woo place, but right off the bat on the first page you see Pergamon International Library of Science, Technology, Engineering, and Social Studies. You know, I just kind of thought, okay, this is like an obscure scientific publisher, but then it says under that publisher, Robert Maxwell, MC. And I went and checked up on that, and yes, that is the Robert Maxwell, Ghislaine Maxwell's father, that published this book.
Wow. That's great. Amazing.
So I don't know what that's all about. You know, the master spy himself, you know, was very invested in getting this this Changing Images of Man report out to the people that need to read it. And you know, of course, the Maxwell family also, they're not actually super separate from a lot of this like very weird cutting edge kind of science stuff. I believe Ghislaine Maxwell's sister is married to somebody who was partners at JPL with Jack Parsons.
Yeah.
So they have like deep.
So much of this book is like about, you know, how we need to basically the changing images of man. It's interesting. It kind of reminds me of the book Controlling Minds of Asia that, you know, Idris Shah's father wrote, because, like, of course, it's, you know, about the minds that are leaders and control Asia is, like, what it's kind of, like, you're supposed to mean. But, of course, it has just of, like, you know, how to control the minds of Asia.
Mind control.
But this really isn't, like, you know, this isn't, like, a survey, really, of changing images of man. There's, like, a little bit of that, although it's very bad and, like, stupid. Like, a lot of their, like, academic ideas or, like, their historical ideas are dumb. Like, really, this is about, like, we need to change the image of man because, like, our technological idea, you know, the technological extrapolation, the image of man, you know, our individualistic capitalist notion of humanity and its place and its relationship to the environment, like, isn't tenable. Which, you know, is a pretty uncontroversial idea that definitely has some truth, but it is interesting, like, when you, like, think about like how this type of thinking has borne itself out, and you think about like, you know, to pick up on the Ghislaine Maxwell connection, like Epstein, you know, and all the people that he would fraternize with, like they're, you know, the scientific creative thinkers who are supposed to be, you know, who are kind of picked out by the authors of the study as the people who are going to forge a new paradigm of the conception of humanity to save us from disaster, and like it's all just like the most craven, like awful, like nanite cloud type stuff, which is like totally just a further development and like hypertrophization of all the things that are supposed to be the problem. So like all this like Age of Aquarius shit like has just, you know, nothing good has come of it.
Exactly. You know. And, you know, I think if you look at, I'm just looking at the list of reviewers who, you know, made some contributions to this report, and there's some heavy hitters here, and especially not just their names, but like where the institutes that they worked for. So you got Joseph Campbell out of New York. We'll probably come back to him a number of times because he's very influential on the kind of the whole framing of this whole thing. You have Renee. He
comes up a bunch of times, and he even has some editorial comments that he made at certain points that are in this edition. They're represented, like his, you know, little comments on things. But he's also quoted and super influential, on the whole way of thinking.
Exactly. And then you have, say, like Rene Dubos from Rockefeller University, Edgar S. Dunn Jr. from the Resources for the Future, Inc. in Washington, D.C. You have James Fadiman from Stanford University. He's a super sus kind of a woo-woo psychologist who's definitely probably caught up in MK Ultra. Just reading his thing here, you know, he went to Harvard and got a bachelor's, master's, and doctorate. He got a master's and doctorate from Stanford in 1965. In Paris in 1961, his friend and former Harvard undergraduate advisor, Ram Dass, introduced him to psychedelics, psilocybin. As a graduate student at Stanford, Fadiman was Stuart Brand's LSD guide on Brand's first LSD trip in 1962 at Myron Stolaroff's International Foundation for Advanced Study in Menlo Park. While living in Menlo Park, Fadiman and his wife were Ken Kesey's Perry Lane neighbors neighbors and friends. In 1963, Fadiman worked at Stanford's Augmentation Research Center, a division that did research on network computing. Fadiman was also part of the team in the psychedelics and problem-solving experiment at the International Foundation for Advanced Study, which was abruptly halted in 1966. He is currently a proponent of microdosing and collects anecdotal reports from those who practice it.
Of course.
He was also a director, and this is another group that pops up. He was a director at the Institute of Noetic Sciences from 1975 to 77.
Yes.
Of course he was. And there's another guy in here, John White, who I think may have been running the Institute of Noetic Sciences. That's also a reviewer of this text. And so, those people pop up.
Well, Willis Harman also was an Institute of Noetic Sciences guy who was like a writer on this. I think he was like a pretty big contributor. The Institute of Noetic Sciences was heavily involved in this book.
Yeah, so we're talking about very much like the same kind of milieu of people that we talked about like in the Grateful Dead episode and other episodes about all these people like swirling around Palo Alto and Menlo Park in the early 1960s doing LSD, like coming up with
Yeah, it's all very tragic because like it's just, in a way like it's not because like in a way, like, you don't have anything, like, pity for these people because, like, they really should have, like, known better. I think there is, like, a lot of naivete going on, but, like, the idea, like, it's just, like, the notion that, they really do, like, the book is, like, so optimistic, like, in tone, I think that a lot of the people who contributed to this, like, really bought into this stuff as, like, being positive for humanity, and like just obliviousness.
I guess you could say that. But then you see some other names on here like B.F. Skinner from Harvard University. A little harder for me to like read noble intent into his kind of whole theory of behaviorism, which they even mention in this, like upsets some people.
Up a lot.
That's like it's considered. Yeah. So then, you got somebody from Yale, Henry Margenau, who I think gets cited a lot. You have Margaret Mead, and I don't know if Gregory Bateson was officially on this, but he is referenced and quoted multiple times. Her husband, Gregory Bateson. And you have Robert A. Smith III from Huntsville, Alabama, where all the Nazi rocket scientists were. I don't know what's up with that. Carl Rogers from the Center for Studies of the Person in spooked out La Jolla, California, near San Diego. And, somebody from Harvard Business School and a bunch of other, Cambridge. And some kind of cybernetic systems theorists. There's I think, Hungarian guy named Ervin Laszlo who pops up a lot. And just like a
section
real
about
gang.
Cybernetics and systems theory in this. And again, something that is... it's a really amazing mix of things. Like, there's one list that, like, they propose, like, a lot of different things as potential, things that they're very... sanguine about as having a good potential for humankind. That's how it's presented. Like, obviously, like, there's a certain audience for this, and there's just so many opportunities where you can see how, like, all of the caveats are going to be disregarded. Honestly, like, I think that a great epitome of the entire book is, like, or of the entire study is towards the very end, like on page 199, when they're laying out the strategies for achieving this. I think this like really distills like perfectly what the sort of impression of the book is. They're talking about this is a one bullet pointed strategy or like an important principle for bringing about the change in the image of man that we need to achieve in order for society to be preserved and for us to, not destroy ourselves through. Basically, they don't say capitalism, but in fact, like they often
really
refer to
like
capitalism positively, but like the technological, post-industrial, like whatever, So they say that we must accept the necessity of social controls for the transition period while safeguarding against longer-term losses of freedom. The transformation that is underway has a paradoxical aspect according to the 5 initial premises. In considerable measure, it has been brought about by the success of material progress, through better nutrition, higher standard of living, education, and the media, in raising more persons above excessive concerns with subsistence needs. All right, yeah. On the other hand, as a transition-related economic decline and social disruption set in, they will tend to accentuate materialistic security needs. Political tensions will rise, and disunity will characterize social affairs. Regulation and restraint of behavior will be necessary in order to hold the society together while it goes around a difficult corner. The more there can be a general understanding of the transitory but inescapable nature of this need, the higher will be the likelihood that a more permanent authoritarian regime can be avoided. So, yeah, like, okay, I get it. Yeah, like, we want to avoid a more permanent authoritarian regime, but for a
They're
reader,
kind of making an argument that it might be inevitable.
Well, they are saying that to a certain point, it's inevitable. They're like straight up saying that at a certain point it's inevitable. And like as a reader, like if I'm in a position where I'm going to be part of the authoritarian regime, I don't care about the second part. You're telling me that an authoritarian regime will be helpful. Yeah. And then you're like, but, you know, we obviously don't want to have this for too long. It's like, well, maybe I do. You know, like,
exactly.
Yeah.
That actually brings up one of the many comparisons that I know we wanted to get to in general of like our framing of like how I guess we read this book, and I kind of read it in a similar way to the way we've read Michael Aquino and Paul Vallely's Mind War paper from 1980, which even though they're not literally, there's no kind of direct interlock connection between them, they clearly are drawing from a lot of the same kind of research and ideas that were floating around in places like Palo Alto and in the San Francisco Bay Area in the 1970s. And Aquino was definitely aware and plugged into like all of the kind of, you know, woo-woo experiments at SRI and the human potential movement and stuff. He just had like a kind of dark version of that he kind of embraced. But, you know, it's like there's so many things in the Mind War paper where he almost starts going off about how, you know, we could do this and that. And, you know, some might say that this sounds a lot like what Joseph Goebbels like would have wanted to do, and that is why it is axiomatic that Mind War must always tell the truth and stand up for like the highest values or something. So he just throws in this caveat of like, well, it would be really effective if we did this. Now, some people might say that this is kind of like totalitarian kind of mind control or social conditioning on like a very proactive mass scale that is similar to what the Nazis did, but that's why we're gonna have like a code. And we're not going to like abuse it, and we're going to always tell the truth, even though later he says, you know, the goal of Mind War is to like make people accept the truth, even if it's not already true, to make them believe that it will inevitably become true, and thus you just have to like capitulate. And so it sounds, you know, it's like he's basically giving all of this toolkit to the generals and then being like, yes, but of course, like, you know, like literally like Dr. Strangelove, like, this could be very, you know, of course, some may have ethical concerns about this, but, you know, like it is necessary for the future, you know, to basically like he's sitting in there, you know. Mm-hmm. And I get a similar vibe from this book.
Yeah, I get a very similar vibe. I mean, the impression is a little bit different for me because maybe just because of the context of like knowing about Aquino. Like I always feel like Aquino like knows what's up, like, you know, writing his fantasy books about the Nazis. Like, I don't really think that Aquino... I do get a sense of, like, that's... Like, you know, this is a collaboration with a lot of people, some of whom I think, like, were genuinely, like, psyop themselves. But, yeah, there might also be some people who were a bit, like, unscrupulous or didn't really care or did have that sort of orientation towards it. But I also just... Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe if you didn't know Aquino, you might read Mind War and just think, like, wow, this guy is really naive and oblivious. I don't think that's really the case, but yeah, I feel like, I don't know, some of this does just have that general atmosphere of 70s bullshit of like being taken in by the potential of Scientology or whatever, like, which literally is mentioned as
they literally favorably quote things about Scientology, and that was a funny thing throughout where I kept reading citations for Hubbard, and maybe because I looked into Al Hubbard recently, you know, from who was one of the kind of Johnny Appleseeds of LSD, and pretty sus dude, that I assumed they must be talking about Al Hubbard and referencing him, which I thought was significant. But then later they list like all of these new kind of human potential spiritual things from like yoga to everything else, and then they like literally bring up like Scientology parentheses Hubbard 1956, and I'm like, oh, okay, so they're literally favorably quoting L. Ron Hubbard and holding up Scientology as a positive step forward in this process of changing the image of man. I guess we should talk real quick about what does that refer to, changing images of man, and what are they kind of getting at in this entire kind of book or paper?
Yeah, well, basically, like, the image of man, there's multiple, like, problematic aspects of it. Like, it's basically, like, the evil Semitic, Judeo-Christian, Islamic, closed off, evil, monotheistic religions that aren't, like, Eastern wisdom, which is, like, kind of ironic. And,
it is.
And just, like, very fucking stupid. Yeah, it's like that, and basically capitalism, basically like corporate greed and everything, about like this genocidal, about like the modern era and like industrial society. That's like the current image of man, man as being above nature and being able to make use of nature for his own
subdue it
purposes.
and exploit
exactly. And that is causing, and as being special in some way, or, basically this evil image of man or this bad image, this destructive image of man that is gonna sabotage us and lead to an ecological or population-based catastrophe that, we need to get around. Yeah.
Yes.
And a great way to do this is, through embracing all this weird stuff. Yeah,
well, it's like embracing the power that they postulate that like a huge kind of driver, I guess you would say, of civilization, of civilizations, is basically dependent upon the commonly held kind of image of man that culture puts forth, that is kind of commonly believed in. So they kind of go through pretty at length, and I think sometimes in a kind of sloppy way, different dominant images of man, going back to antiquity, and then going through the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, and then to today, which they kind of focus on as like advanced industrial society. They never really call it capitalism, and I think they only explicitly refer to socialism a couple times.
Societies. They propose kind of a soft, quote-unquote new socialism, which is just like a lot of their ideas. It's so funny because someone who has a little bit of sustenance himself, as we know, Derrida, and I think I just have it on my mind because I've been reading his stuff about Artaud lately, but one of his big points really is one of his big points in his whole career is just like how all these like destructive discourses, these discourses that want to force this big revolution or transformation, a lot of the time they can't escape like the epistemic confines that they're operating within. And so everything that they come up with, once they're like, let's, this is how we need to transform, it's just like this like psychotic, hyper-capitalist, like liberal, like, globalist thing. Like,
they're kind of, it reminds me...
getting involved with the third world, will be a benefit to them and the corporations. Like, wow. Like,
everyone's
what an age
win.
of Aquarius, No, this is actually a great, there's a great chart that, really triggered me in here. It's Table 3, Dominant Images of Humankind Throughout History. So they go through all of history in, a very, sloppy, dumb way, which I think is pretty amusing. So they start off with, the Middle Paleolithic, right? That's the beginning. That's 2,500,000 to 40,000 BC. And so the dominant image of man then was the hunter. And he was the focus of the male-dominated culture field of the Great Hunt. But few cultures have this image active now. That's one of the columns, is cultures in which image is at present active. This isn't active in many cultures in its pure form, but it is maybe in its militaristic equivalent. But this has bad significance for the post-industrial era in terms of, moving past our era now, because it jeopardizes cross-cultural peace, but it may be necessary for police operations. So then then we move into the Upper Paleolithic, where there's a sense of spiritual affinity between beast and man, of which totemism is an expression. And so this is still active in various American Indian cultures with traditions intact. And this has significance for, the post-industrial era, because there could be a renewed sense of partnership with other life forms on the planet, Then, after 9,000 BC in the Neolithic, that's when we get, agriculture. So then we have the planter, the child of the goddess, woman, the giver of life. And this image is present in Hindu and certain other cultures. And this is useful, and it has possible relevance because it could balance the male emphasis of Western culture. Then we have the Sumerian image of man, and that comes in 30,500 BC. So that's when the human is civilized through submission to seasonal variations and ruling elites. Most cultures still have this idea. And this has relevance as a historical analogy, and it shows the political function of new images. Then we get to the really bad thing. That's when then it all goes wrong in 2350 BC when you have the Semite image. And that's the human as a mere creature, fashioned of clay to serve the gods or of some god as a slave, but superior to and having dominion over nature. Notion of quote-unquote chosen people. So this is part of Orthodox Jewish, Christian, and Islamic faiths. Stands in its present form as an obstacle to emergence of new ecological understandings. It's just like, of all things, like, for one, if there's a problem with the notion of chosen people, I feel like we're seeing it, right now we're recording this on May 14th, so I feel like there might be something to point out as a problem, but I don't think that there's anything about that is like harming the environment. Like, I don't it's harming the environment.
That's very rooted. That's very rooted in the American context, I think. Well, I mean, you could maybe say that about European colonialism over the last 500 years, that there was that
I would
kind
almost
of attitude.
say that doesn't have anything to do with Christianity or Orthodox, or the Semitic image from 2350 BC. I think that has to do with the Enlightenment and the idea of brute matter, not with the idea of humankind as having a Khalifa over the earth and being custodians of the world. There's like a huge ecological impetus in Islamic faiths. But anyway,
even like medieval Christianity, I feel like didn't have the kind of rampaging Protestant ethos of it says here in the Bible, got to go out in the world and just like subdue it and monetize everything.
And also this is very idealist, and it's kind of doesn't really represent the synthesis, the dialectical idea between epistemology and technology and spirituality and materiality, because these genocidal systems and these genocidal ideologies often emerge in tandem, fact that we have to have this triangle trade of chattel slavery, and for instance the idea of the curse of Ham being proliferated and interpreted as being black people, they're inferior because of the curse of Ham, those things. Before that wasn't some people maybe made that connection here and there, but it wasn't nearly as dominant as it became.
That was a hot take that originated later, much later.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So to say it's a code in all Semitic, it's the universal grammar of all Semitic religions, even the Babylonian ones, is kind of a lot.
Yeah. And it's just it's so typical of this type of thing, but thankfully we also had in 1200 BC. It's interesting because it's so ahistorical and stupid to be Islam, Judaism, and Christianity are all part of the Semitic idea that is, from 2000 BC, but then more advanced than that is Zoroastrianism from 1200 BC. So Islam, which came about 600 years after Christ, is in the same paradigm as, and less advanced than Zoroastrianism, which it completely replaced. Anyway, or more,
and they even bring up Zoroastrianism.
Replaced.
Yeah, they even bring it up positively as something that influenced Christianity.
As base. Yeah. He says, he says, human having free will, having to choose between good and evil, and mythology of individual salvation. And he says this is in all Western cultures in a secular form. And this idea, of course, much like how we need the mother goddess of Baphomet, this idea of good and evil is a basic polarity needing to be dialectically transcended and or synthesized. But the best, one of the best, one of the greatest, of course, is just these amazing, brilliant Hindus and Buddhists. They have it all figured out. And, the idea of a human being deluded by the Maya, and the Buddha representing the absolute fulfillment of the Indian image of man as a yogi, released from the will of karma, the intrinsic divinity of humankind, realizable through own efforts. Another, idea that is totally in Christianity and Islam, the idea that there's a piece of God in humanity, anyway.
Yeah, we're not mere beasts. That's definitely not the thrust of the Abrahamic religions, is that we are mere beasts, just made out of clay.
Mere creature fashioned of clay. Well, we are mere creatures. we are creatures, and so far as we create,
I mean, we are.
Yeah,
but we have free will. We have stuff, and we have like a spark. We have like a little speck of that divinity thing in us.
Well, of course, because we're God's creation. So yeah, we have exactly God breathed His spirit into us. Yeah, but the Hindu and Buddhist idea could contribute to a new self-realization ethic for our culture if incorporated into a larger synthesis. So that is just awesome, and I think that we can really see bearing itself out today, like how when a society is organized around the ideas of Hinduism, like that is just awesome. Like, you know, when we have like a real emphasis on Hinduism, like in society, and the important ideas of you know, the enlightened ideas of Hinduism, that is just great for everyone, and like everyone prospers. So that they were definitely spot on about that. A society in perfect harmony with no inequalities whatsoever. It's just, you know, they figured it out. So why don't we just get on their level? The caste system based, we should just get on that level too. I do think that I do sense there's a lurking thing in all of these kind of weird hoity-toity academics at places like Stanford and these Ivy Leagues in the 20th century, that there's something under the surface of like, oh, the caste system, that's kind of dope. Like, well, and like a spiritually enforced. The caste system is like, does have precedence. Like, it is an idea that actually is like in whatever you want to call it. Hinduism is like really like an academic construct, and the idea of Hinduism today is relatively modern. But the caste system, like as we think of it now, just the fact that it's so heavily associated with the English word caste is because like it was used as like an administrative organization tactic by like the British Raj in the colonial period. Like that, it was transformed and like bureaucratized, and like the way that it is now is different from, it always was around. Like, people tend to say, like, it's a whole thing where people are like, well, everything bad didn't exist before, colonization. But they definitely, like, ran with it. And they're like, we're going to organize, this is how these Hindus think. They love caste, and we're just going to organize all society. And they've definitely, like, exacerbated it and, like, did a lot to create the caste system as we know it now. So there's definitely something to that. Which would make it even more appealing, because they recognize part of their own kind of creation of their class, basically, in a larger sense, in creating it. And on top of that, I think it's easy to that point. It's always been appealing. They saw it to begin with. I'm sure that if you're just like going through like reading Sanskrit documents, you could find a bunch of different ways to understand like, how to rule Indian society. But there's a reason why it's like the caste system, this rules. Let's do this. I think it speaks to an interesting tension that runs throughout this entire report that I think they're kind of like, to varying degrees of dishonesty, trying to grapple with this dialectic between, well, we have this society where, in this Western society, where the dominant images of man are kind of rooted in a sort of like individualism and a sense of self that is like shot through all of our culture, our like democratic institutions, our economy, everything else. And when you look over at a place like India, they say multiple times throughout the report that, if only we could kind of we could import the kind of Eastern epistemological outlook upon like reality and spirituality and all these other things, where they acknowledge the kind of the blurred lines between the provable and like the mystical and things, the empirical and the mystical or whatever, and all these other things. So in a way, it's almost like, like that caste system we helped exacerbate and set up to rule India was pretty damn effective, but it worked because they're Indians who have certain images of man already that we were able to exploit. So in order to do something similar here, even though us even writing this report and the funding of it and the entire project we're involved in is almost like a class collaborative, it truly is a subliminal jihad that is ultimately trying to reify and entrench and preserve the system of individual property rights. Like, it really is kind of, they don't want the notion of self in the capitalist context to be overturned by anything. I think that's like the kind of the subtext of like this entire report is but we don't want to give away like our wealth and our power and like share it, like that's not going to work. So that's unacceptable. this part
maybe
of the
we have to
report
change
is
everybody's
like extremely. Yeah, the 500 BC Age of the Polis, which has this Hindu-Buddhist thing, you know, it's really telling because they go through, like, everything. You know, they say China, you know, when they have Confucianism, and, you know, they have the idea of a socially concerned sage in these Oriental cultures, literally, you know, quote-unquote. And that could help for an ecological ethic. And they even say, you know, in the Levant, you know, you have the idea of man as a slave, and is submissive to God in the image of a despot. Which is, like, just amazing. Like, it says some forms of Islam. I don't know what that means by some forms of Islam. And Christianity. For one, I do not think that the image of God in Islam is a despot. Or in Christianity. Like, that a despot is a negative term. So, like, no one who subscribes to either of those beliefs. But they say that it's possible to see ecological requirements in this light. For one, like, something that I think that people who actually, like, know anything about Islam and have thought about, like, you know, ecological ideas in Islam, like, they find many. For instance, what I mentioned, the idea that humanity is a custodian of the earth and all the injunctions that we have to take care of animals or the world and things like that, not to destroy, you know, land or pillage things, like, unnecessarily. You know, so I think there's, like, many, you know, ideas that could, but, like, the idea that they're like, oh, you know what could be helpful for ecological requirements? The idea that human beings are slaves of a despot.
Exactly. Well, you know, it also lines up with, you know, like, we don't want to go that other way of collectivism, because then you're just, that's just the old Christian technology with a new face. Like, it's still religious and putting all your faith in a despot, an evil mustachioed despot who gets to control your entire life, and you're a bad little pig, and blah, blah, everyone wears gray jumpsuits, etc. So, you know, they don't want to go in that direction, either in the, like, revolutionary, collectivized socialist direction that's atheist, or like a more traditional religious Western, or, you know, Western, quote unquote, or Abrahamic kind of tradition. You know, they want to find
exactly. They don't want dirty, disgusting, vile Islam. You know, they want beautiful Oriental wisdom. You know, they want Alan Watts stuff. You know,
they do.
And in fact, like, you know, they want Gnosticism as well. That's another, like, you know, they want Greek mystery religions. And, you know, once we get to 100 AD, that's when we have the two contrary images of man, which is one which is, like, you know, the Semitic and Zoroastrian tradition of being God's servant, obey or be damned. And they spell damned with two M's. So you need to obey God, or that you won't get to come, I guess. Beaver, well, you know, I don't, I feel like that's a Freudian slip, to quote their favorite, you know, but anyway, but then there's also the image of the Gnostics, you know, which is similar to the amazing Greek mystery religions, and that's the idea of the person being saved by self-knowledge. So the first one, that's in all traditional Judeo/Christian/Muslim cultures, but there's a Gnostic idea, you know, that's in most cultures as an underground view. And the first one, you know, that's a dominant image, and it needs to be incorporated into a larger synthesis. It needs to be, like, obviously we prefer maybe it weren't, but it has to be. And then, you know, thankfully we need a new self-realization ethic from these Gnostic ideas of God being an evil demiurge and Satan being good. That is an underground view, and is so helpful. But so in terms of the image of man that we need to deal with today, that's when we get to the only other thing in history that has been, like, a not useful or bad image of man, which is the Industrial Revolution / Enlightenment idea, which I think that, you know, is they're right about this. This is the one thing that I find to be, like, generally kind of true. The idea of the economic man, individualistic, materialistic, rationalistic, objective knowledge, utilitarian / economic values coming into dominance. You know, this is in most modern industrial nations, likely inappropriate for transition to post-industrial era. So this is inappropriate. It's likely inappropriate. Probably this is not going to be helpful. You know, they won't mention the term capitalism, but, you know, that's obviously part of that. Anyway, but yeah, then there are some other ideas that are okay, kind of. Like, modern social science has the idea of human as a beast, with instinctual drives being predominant, and a creature of evolution whose survival depends on competitive adaptation and/or suppression of base instincts, and that's, you know, active in most modern industrial nations. And this image needs to be incorporated into a larger synthesis. So I guess we do need that idea of, like, human beings as being, like, Pavlovian monsters who are beasts, but it needs to be incorporated. Or maybe it's just an image that is dominant, so we need to incorporate it. I don't know. But anyway, Then we have the human as mechanism, and then that's popular in the United States. And it can be promoted as providing the most appropriate basis for man's next era, perhaps now itself needing to be incorporated into larger synthesis. So I guess maybe at one time it was. We have human as goal-directed adaptive learning system. That's coming in 1945 AD. And this image, the idea of a human as an adaptive learning system, which just sounds so great, that hasn't reached a takeoff point, but that provides a possible conceptual basis for integrating most other images of man as an evolutionary frame of reference. So basically we need to, that's a good takeoff point to say, like, oh, these other images have been like programs that are plugged into the wet CPU of the adaptive learning system. And, if we have the overarching image of, like, the adaptive learning system, then that can reconcile and synthesize all this stuff. But then, of course, the greatest thing, that we also need is the idea of human as spirit. The philosophia perennis, which I just... like, is just such a fucking annoying thing. Like,
they're all about that, the perennial philosophy.
And it's so wishy-washy and lame and awful. Like, I get it, like, perennialism, like, really, like, the idea that there is something to all religions, like, that's an Islamic idea. Like, Jesus had a book, Moses had a book. Like, the idea, like, there's prophets, Buddha perhaps prophet, maybe even Krishna. But, so there's, like, an idea, there's something to, like, these things. Like, that's the basic principle of it, but like the way that it's actually applied, like by perennialists, for the most part, often, I'm not gonna just write them all off. That maybe there's some that do interesting work, but a lot of it's just so wishy-washy and like generalized, and in this case, I feel like just instrumentalized, where it's just like take cafeteria, like take what
it is cafeteria, build a new religion, mod it out, like it's very cyberpunk.
With the adaptive learning system, and so we need to, that's in most cultures, but only in various degrees of purity. So some cultures, I guess probably the pure noble savages maybe have it more pure, like the amazing Hindus, but I don't know, like they maybe have it more purely, but this is good because this can contribute to a needed synthesis of opposing images as it sees apparent opposites as differing aspects of the same underlying reality. Well, like that's a extremely very common idea that
as Idris Shah would say, like a bunch of blind monks were groping on a creature and they described it differently, and it was an elephant, and
exactly.
We're all just touching different parts of the elephant. It's like we've been here, ain't nothing new under the sun. We've been here before. This is all just like theological dialectics.
That's basically the whole like historical anthropology that's being brought out here. Like we've had all these different images of man. Right now we have this one that's kind of like, a combination of like disgusting Nazarene scum and also like filthy Muslims, and I guess Jews, any like Semites, these Semite ideas, and also genocidal industrial capitalism. And we need to fix that by like, and that's leading to a disaster. So we need to fix that by going to like Oriental wisdom as filtered through like the dumbest people alive,
and like, incorporate it into a new matrix of
shit. Exactly.
There's a lot of many references in this to us being a floppy disk wet CPU again and again. They reference John C. Lilly and other people. But the other thing that jumps out, as you were saying, all that stuff, is it's kind of implicit in this entire thing that they are, as we've talked about before with some of these, research universities like MIT studying Maoism as like a social technology, and even Mao himself studying the techniques of Christian missionaries in China and kind of picking up some things from them. They are kind of inherently looking at religion as an instrumentalized technology and being like, like what combination of things could we put together? But they're not quite admitting fully that that's what they're doing. They're like, no, we need to get outside of this bounded epistemological framework of like the Abrahamic, Western religions and dive into this like sublime, but they're really just talking about stripping like Hinduism for parts and finding things like yoga or meditation that could be like kind of plugged in as a part of, and they're also talking about kind of like their hypothesizing how to kind of rebuild the next generation of the spectacle that like Guy Debord kind of talked about a little bit. Like because that's really, this is about the commonly shared images of men that like mediate everything. They don't really get so much into like the Debordian stuff about alienation and all that stuff, because they're very conscious that four-letter word Marx never comes up, I think, once in this entire report, even though they talk about dialectics and stuff like that. But they're kind of
much more Hegelian, much more Hegelian like idea type stuff.
Yeah, but you see it's like with Idris Shah and with everybody else, like they're basically like doing the cafeteria thing where they're like plucking certain practices and ideas and then being like, let's like work some of these in, and then we can kind of socially condition people, and they have a variety of ways of proposing how to do that go from more soft to more proactive, let's say. But eventually they want to create a new compatible commonly held image of man in the United States and the Western countries that will help us move past this industrial era, which they felt was like hitting its limits. And this was during the 70s, so if we want to think about global strategy, this is like kind of just before, I think, like Nixon and Mao had their meeting and we opened up relations with China, and we were still going through Vietnam. We were just starting the kind of deindustrialization kind of process of the American industrial economy. So it's interesting they're bringing this up now as like, we have to move away from this, but they already kind of, it's almost like the heads of these major corporations were kind of itching to move beyond it because the profitability was falling after we had this special period of growth for about 25-30 years after World War II where we were like the undisputed industrial hegemon of the world. But then people kind of started to catch up to us, and with the constraints of like the gold standard and stuff like that, we were hitting some like weird structural issues, and it looked like we were unable to win in Vietnam. Socialism keeps kind of spreading throughout the third world and like national liberation movements. There's even, I think it was probably too early to see that like political Islam would blow up into another major force. So it like kind of reemphasize the role of like spiritual belief and religion in kind of social, activities and conflicts.
Yeah, true.
But it's like they were thinking, and it says right in the beginning, if you're wondering like kind of who funded this, they say it right up front that about the same time that they were setting up the kind of educational policy research centers, the EPRCs, one of which was at SRI, and they took like an open-ended approach to like possible futures. And they said about this same time, the Charles F. Kettering Foundation was looking for, quote, high leverage ideas, possibly risky approaches to social policy research and development in which a relatively small amount of support might, if successful, lead to a beneficial effect on society that is relatively large. So, they wanted to, the Charles Kettering Foundation, he had believed was the head kind of technology guy at General Motors for 20 or 25 years, a very big inventor and intimately associated with both DuPont and General Motors. So, what did the Charles F. Kettering Foundation want out of this study? I think they wanted to map out like, well, let's take like a very large and maybe kind of a little woo-woo but like inclusive view of like how could we move towards a kind of post-industrial society. And you can see the way they're talking. This is also when the Club of Rome was starting, and that kind of overpopulation hype really just like exploded in the early 70s. And you had people like Governor Jerry Brown talking about how this is like the era of limits, and that growth was actually kind of suicidal, and that, which is kind of a convenient thing if you think of this is when the companies start offshoring their jobs to like Asia or Mexico or whatever, that like suddenly it's like, it's kind of like today where if they want certain businesses to like go under or be replaced by other businesses, they'd be like, well, this business is bad for climate change, it has no future, it needs to go away, that kind of thing. It's like a convenient argument. And so
right. And it's also like, again, like I think that there's a great sentence that they have here about like, they say towards the end, there must be a new economics, if not steady state in a strict sense, at least compatible with the constraints of the new scarcity. An economic theory and practice always implies a psychology, or more particularly, a set of assumptions about human motivation. If motivations change because the basic picture of man on Earth and man in the cosmos has altered, then economics must change. If the old economics required steady material growth as a necessary condition for a healthy economy, it does not follow that the new economics will likewise. Similarly, the definitions of good corporate behavior and good business policy depend upon tacit social agreements about the bases for legitimation and change when those bases change. It may seem wildly utopian in 1974 to think of the multinational corporations as potentially among our most effective mechanisms for husbanding the Earth's resources and optimizing their use for human benefits. The current popular image of the corporation tends to be more that of the spoiler and the exploiter. But the power of legitimation is strong, as discussed in Chapter 7, and the concept is growing that business must derive its just powers from the consent of those affected by its actions. The vision of a workable future must include a resolution of the present unsatisfactory situation where what is apparently sound business practice and good economics is often very unwise when viewed in light of the new scarcity. So, like, again, that's a paragraph where, like, you know, if I'm, like, a CEO or whatever, I can just, like, you know, again, like, take totally what I want from that, which is, like, okay, like, I need to legitimize myself in the eyes of, like, the people. We're headed towards a new scarcity, like, you know, it's, and it's the kind of thing where it's like, okay, are you just incredibly naive and dumb? Are you kind of winking? Like, you can't really say, but, like, either way, it's like
it sounds like they're implicitly saying we need to psyop everybody on a long-term basis with corporate propaganda to convince everybody that we're actually super progressive and responsible and like careful stewards of the earth, which is literally, I would say, at least half of commercials today. It sounds exactly
like shareholder capital, like the idea is stakeholder capitalism.
Inclusive stakeholder. This is Klaus Schwab's like Great Reset kind of thinking, like in its protean form.
This really is exactly the Great Reset thing, because it's talking about the necessity of the Great Reset. It is the same idea, basically, that there needs to be
and just like the Great Reset, it's using this euphemistic language, which, if you're kind of naive or not paying close enough attention, can almost sound like a form of, you know, at least, you know, capitalism with a human face, you know, like, or, you know, a step towards a better social contract or something. But you notice, like, with both the Great Reset and this study, that, you know, they dance so carefully around kind of ideas of collectivism or redistribution of wealth. They almost never bring up they don't even like bring it up, like set it up to knock it down. The idea that like, oh, maybe we should like not radically. It's also before the 80s when the distribution of wealth started really going back to the way it was before the New Deal, and it hasn't stopped since. But, you know, it's at a point where actually, relatively speaking, income inequality was a historical low in the United States in the 60s and 70s. And, you know, it was before all the unions kind of got busted up and all the jobs got offshored and stuff. So you think even then, I don't know, maybe they just thought that enough wealth has been redistributed, you know, and there weren't like Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates yet that were collecting all this money for what, I don't know. But you can see that they just don't want to get into any kind of a thorny issue of, you know, because they're trying to be so bold and epistemologically liberated and, you know, call out all these other disciplines for thinking too narrowly or thinking in an old paradigm. But then they just like can't even, they don't want to open that Pandora's box when it comes to like, well, what about like the Marxian counter narrative about the way society should be organized? All they really say is that, well, they list a bunch of problems with like advanced industrial society and say, oh, by the way, this also applies to advanced collectivist industrial societies. So the form of government actually doesn't really matter. These are just about symptoms of this system of economic organization, which is kind of like, I read that as a little bit of a subtweet of like, and we could use this against them. This isn't just for our own benefit. Like because they just listed a bunch of vulnerabilities of a system that undergoes a kind of epistemological crisis where people stop believing in kind of the forward progress that they're supposed to be on. And it, like, really, maybe we'll get to that quote later, but it sounds a lot like what actually ended up happening in the Soviet Union in the late 1980s and like in the communist bloc, like a kind of they actually compare, you know, like a a crisis can kind of take the form of like a psychotic break, almost in a Freudian sense. It's very reductive, but you can kind of see like the things they list of like the irrationality or like the breakdown of like commonly held norms and like confused things of like, authority becoming just all these kind of things. But anyways, I think it's very sus. Like they're basically to every billionaire or someone sitting on the corporate board of like 10 different commanding heights corporations, this is a very handy report, just like Mind War would be for like military planners, and you can kind of read between the lines a little bit and probably get some good things, because I don't know, why did the Kettering Foundation sponsor this high leverage report? I mean, that's kind of funny. High leverage ideas, possibly risky approaches to social policy research and development in which a relatively small amount of support might, if successful, lead to a beneficial effect on society that is relatively large. And I would say, arguably, maybe they succeeded at that, because it wasn't very expensive to do this study, and it seems to have seeped into the groundwater of what was happening at Silicon Valley. And, this is the same place that developed networked computer technology, and was like, one of the first places using ARPANET and the internet. And they invented the mouse interface and the graphical user interface and put Cookie Monster on it as a psyop, to convince little kids that computers were cute and cuddly and, and like enhance cathexis. So like, this is like, these are the cathexis mind controllers themselves, like the same institution writing about, oh, we should just like start mishmashing our myths and maybe dabbling a little bit in some Eastern religious practices, and then like kind of steer people away, like kind of getting out in front of the fact that like, at a certain point,
let's use what we can, what are the resources that we can exploit. It's very much that Idris Shah type of thing, where it's like, oh, we're gonna pick and choose. I think that someone even there are some great notes, of course they're part of the report, so people can like take them into account, but there are some great notes of people just being like, this is like so dumb and ridiculous. And like there's one that's like amazing. Like there's one guy who I think is kind of like a sus like futurist guy himself, like Michael Marion, who has like some amazing critiques in the margins, where he'll be like, I think you're being a little bit too optimistic about humanistic capitalism. Have you ever heard of like co-optation before? Like literally he's like, have you heard of co-optation? Like
the band of fucking merry pranksters that wrote this have no idea about co-optation. They've never heard of it, never seen it with their own eyes, never participated in it, I'm sure.
Yeah, there's another note that someone made that was like, there's an assumption that we will like use what we want from the East, and that's this is all like very like focused on the United States and on America, but it's like, there's some amazing like very Shah type like mentions of Sufism in here that come up. Like there's one that you even took a note on, because it was probably the most ridiculous one ever, and it's again about like their love of Gnosticism, where they're saying, this tension between the Gnostic understanding of apocalyptic symbolism and that of the early church, which condemned it as heretical, is the essence of what is sometimes called the, quote, Judeo-Christian problem. I wonder, like, by who? Like, some people are saying... Yeah. Anyway, is the apocalyptic...
Anton
LaVey? Is an
David
apocalyptic
Myatt?
Messiah to come... Yeah, exactly. This is so David Myatt-y at, like, various points, But, like, is an apocalyptic Messiah to come, or come again, and thus grandly save the elect from evil? Or is the, quote, kingdom of the Father already here within us, within ourselves and our world, as is, quote, Buddha consciousness and the mother light, only waiting to be recognized and fulfilled? Like, again, like just the laziest thing. But anyway, so they then do a little reference here. The conundrum was also inherited by Islam and supplied the whole sense of the contention between... This is like, when I say that I hate the word mystic, this is what I'm talking about. Yeah. So the contention between the Sufis of the mystic way and the orthodox sunnah of the law, which, like, I think is really like a parallelism error, because they're talking about the sunnah like as a group of people, like Sufis is being related to sunnah, and they're called, the Ahl Sunnah or Sunnis, like generally is what you would say, but... Of course,
shouldn't it be like the mystic way of the the Sufis and the I don't know.
Yeah, the orthodox Sunnis of the law would be the correct grammatical parallelism, but it would be incredibly stupid from like the point of view of knowing anything about Islam. Like most Sufis are Sunni, and no Sufi would say they don't follow the Sunnah. Like like not even like a Shia Sufi would say that. We had a whole episode about Rumi. Rumi, he was a Hanafi Mufti. He was the Mufti of, I think, Konya. But anyway, he was like a trained legal scholar. Like it's a very just stupid Idris Shah, Alan Watts type stuff, like typical thing. Where it's like, we're going to use this, like, stupid thing. But there's a lot of like gibberish in here that I'm sure we'll talk about.
Reads Rumi once. That last paragraph, I don't know if you referenced it earlier, but it also it brings to mind something that they do reference in a sus way a few times when they're talking. Right after they said that great sentence, they said, because the Gnostic path was condemned as heretical, of necessity it went underground, and hence its influence on our culture is much less visible than are the effects of the Orthodox views. It and views like it, however, have been kept alive by secret societies such as the Sufis, Freemasons, and Rosicrucians, whose influence on the founding of the United States is attested to by the symbolism of the Great Seal of the United States on the back of the dollar bill. The Semitic, Zoroastrian, Orthodox Christian image, meanwhile, came into dominance in Western Europe.
That's what's so David Mayan.
Yeah,
they
drop. They drop the wall up at the end. This image of the human as separate laid the groundwork for the Industrial Revolution to come. So boom, there you go, folks. That's how the Industrial Revolution happened. But there's so much with that. Also, just mixing alive that like the views of Gnosticism have been kept alive by secret societies. I don't know if these people know something about secret societies, such as the Sufis, Freemasons, and Rosicrucians, whose influence on the founding of the United States is attested to by the symbolism of the Great Seal. I'm pretty sure that they're talking about Freemasons.
I can only assume that this, like, that's literally Idris Shah-ism, because they are saying, the Sufis, like, the idea of the Sufis being connected with Freemasons is an Idris Shah thing. The idea of the Sufis being a secret society is a Gardnerian secret society is so like what? Where'd you get that from? Only one possible place, really, which is like that whole network of like ideas.
Probably Idris Shah, who was hanging around at Stanford during these years.
I can only assume. Yeah, I can only assume. And like the idea that it was the flame of Gnosticism was carried like through, to glorious, Rosicrucianism. Like, it's amazing that they really do continually say in this, like, they continually point to Theosophy, Rosicrucianism, Freemasonry, and literally Scientology as being, like, great things that, like, we need to look to organize, like, the future transformation of humanity. Like,
right?
It's just, like, really,
it's very
awesome.
interesting. And they do mention the occult kind of in general, though they never talk about the OTO or anything like that. But, but just the structure of that sentence, because now I'm realizing, the conundrum inherited by Islam sentence is formatted in a very vague, like, sloppy way that doesn't make sense. But so is the thing, like, and Rosicrucians, whose influence on the founding of the United States is attested to by the symbolism of the Great Seal on the dollar bill. Correct me if I'm wrong, but like that must be kind of a poorly written sentence. That they're not saying that the Rosicrucians were instrumental in the founding of the United States, or am I wrong?
You know what? It might be another Freudian slip, and what they're saying is that because this is the Idris Shah idea that these things are actually the same. That
okay, I guess if I'm gonna read, maybe it would have been more clear if they had put it in parentheses, like such as the Sufis, Freemasons, and Rosicrucians. I think what they mean is that secret societies that kept Gnosticism alive had a great influence on the founding of the U.S., and it's attested to by the Great Seal on the back of the dollar bill. Now, I think most people would attribute that to the Freemasonic secret societies that people like George Washington and all these other guys were in.
Yeah, and of course, like, Freemasons hated the Industrial Revolution and fought against it tooth and nail. As we know, because of their Gnostic beliefs in the man as being a spirit, they were really anti-capitalism and industrial society. Like, all the founding fathers of the United States, they were very spiritual, enlightened people because of their Freemasonic beliefs, and they were not about the Industrial Revolution at all.
Okay, so you're being a little sarcastic there.
Yes, I'm being sarcastic, because that's what they say. They say the Semitic, Zoroastrian, Orthodox Christian image came to dominance in Western Europe, and the image as the human as separate laid the groundwork for the Industrial Revolution to come. But yeah, they're saying
that's very weird. They're trying to have it both ways. Like, which one is it? Did the ideology of the Nazarene scum create industrial capitalism, or did the flame keepers of the Gnostic wisdom, the Freemasons, actually bring it into being?
No, they didn't.
Founding
they
the
didn't.
United States?
The United States has the secret societies, because that's what they say about Freemasonry. They go on to say that we could use the Freemasonic or these principles as
a new
part
image
of this transformation. Yeah, exactly. To create.
Is that why? Is that why the music videos? Oh my God.
Oh yeah, maybe.
It's all a part of laying the ground, the symbolic groundwork. It is kind of it's a little more subtle than Revelation of the Method, but it's seeding these images. I thought this was in the same part, but it actually is a little bit later. It says Chapter 6 describes some characteristics of, quote, the image of man, which is at once compatible with the remergent perennial philosophy and is well adapted for dealing with humankind's contemporary dilemmas. Of special interest to the Western world is that Freemasonry tradition, which played such a significant role in the birth of the United States of America, as attested to by the symbolism of the Great Seal on the back of the dollar bill. And they have a picture of it here. They put a picture of it there.
In this version of the transcendental image, the central emphasis is on the role of creative work in the life of the individual. In true Freemasonry, there is one lodge, the universe, and one brotherhood, everything that exists. Each person has the privilege of labor, of joining with the great architect in building more noble structures and thus serving in the divine plan. Thus, this version of the new transcendentalism, perhaps more than other versions imported from the East more recently, has the potentiality of reactivating the American symbols, reinterpreting the work ethic, supporting the basic concepts of a free enterprise democratic society, and providing new meanings for the technological industrial thrust. At the same time, it is compatible with other versions more indigenous to other parts of the globe. So, this is
all the secret societies need to get together and start plotting to basically
because this is the same secret occult tradition that spans the whole world, the witch cult of Baphomet, literally. I'm not
really
even kidding. Literally. The guy who edited this is extremely sus, just in terms of the beliefs of his and the ideas that he likes that bleed through.
Is it really a great architect or a great archon that he's referring to? Yaldabaoth, maybe.
I guess the Sa-Class is the Nazarene scum, god that we need to.
I thought we had to. I forgot. Didn't we have to be afraid of Sa-Class?
Yeah, well, Sa-Class is the Nazarene scum god that is the impersonator. He is.
Oh, you're right. Yeah, because it's flipped in Gnosticism, where Satan is a helpful demigod. Is that it, or
he's good? He maybe it depends. It depends on the Gnostic teaching or the Gnostic idea,
true.
But a lot of the time, eating the apple, somehow it was good to eat the apple, whether because Satan was good or maybe because Satan was tricked in some way, or maybe Satan the serpent aren't the same,
and basically
Jehovah
is catfishing as the one true God.
When he says, there is no God other than me, he's saying, exactly, he's lying.
Jehovah lied. Jehovah lied.
Jehovah lied, yes. Cool. That's the idea that God is an evil archon, Satan is good, etc. And we all have to follow the perennial wisdom and be down with Freemasonry. I don't know, but for one, I feel Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism isn't really Gnostic, but it is this kind of thing of the whole tradition, it's David Myatt thing where it's the Order of the Nine Angles goes back to ancient pagan times, it's been unchanged, the perennial tradition, so but of course,
I guess they're kind of talking about a parental counter tradition in a way. At least in the Western context.
Yeah, it's an right. It is a perennial occult tradition.
A counter culture, if you will. The original counterculture. Exactly. Countering who?
Yeah, and
Allah? Maybe.
And that has to become countering Allah, and that has to become the main new image so that we can and it's really fun. Yeah, it's amazing that they've kind of have identified capitalism as the problem of, well, they didn't identify it because identifying something is naming it, but they kind of have a point, they're getting at something, but they really like go into the weeds where it's like the real problem is like that people believe in like monotheistic religions and like they're not down enough with Freemasonry, and that's what needs to change. Like, okay, yeah, like
cool,
yeah,
right,
like
right
thank
on,
you, yeah,
get to work, everybody.
Come gather round, people, wherever you roam. Admit that the waters around you have grown. Accept it that soon you'll be drenched to the bone. If your time to you is worth saving, then you better start swimming or you'll sink like a stone. All the times they are a-changing. Come writers and critics and prophesize with your pen. Keep your eyes open, the chance won't come again. And watch what you say, or the wheels still in spin. There's no telling who that it's naming. All the loser now will be later to win. All the times they are a-changing.
Did you want to zero in maybe on some kind of discussions of like totalitarian dystopia? Pop up
I think that actually we were just looking at the part where this kind of comes in, or some discussions of like totalitarianism, or like the authoritarian possibilities that like we want to like quote unquote avoid, or
totally
like
avoid.
that, like we're just gonna spend a lot of time talking about, but But yeah, this is actually an interesting part that you were pointing to like beforehand, where it's talking about dystopian images of humankind. The idea that if the future is portrayed in primarily dystopian terms, a dystopian image of humankind will prevail in the collective unconscious of the culture. And then they quote Margaret Mead, basically like she says, all visions of heaven in this world and in the next have a curious, tasteless, pale blue and pink quality. I mean, this is something that I've heard. I really don't feel that that's true, for instance, in like the Quran, that like the visions of heaven are like stale and tasteless, at all. But like, I have
maybe in the corny
say, like,
popular
if
consciousness.
If everything's perfect, everything would be boring, But it's like something that people say, like any picture of heaven above or heaven on earth, the pictures of hell and destruction stand out in vivid and compelling intensity. Each detail strong enough to grip the imagination as the horrid creations of a Wells, an Orwell, or an Aldous Huxley unroll before our horrified eyes. Where positive utopias are insipid and a detailed heaven is unbearable to think of as a permanent abode. Alright, the creators of terror have no such problem. So if utopian visions are the stuff by which men live, it would seem a legitimate subject of inquiry to ask, what is the matter with them? Why is hell always so much more vivid than heaven? And, Aldous Huxley, they quote him after that. Or as Aldous Huxley once observed, a dualistic perception of God may be bad metaphysics, but it makes good art.
Wow. I guess we could, if we asked Don Henley, I guess you're right. Like, hell can be more interesting than talking about heaven, but maybe that's because we live in a satanic society.
I guess like hell, it's more maybe provocative, or it's more gripping because it's horrible in like a car accident way, where like
it's more dramatic.
People, it's more exactly. It has more drama to it. It isn't. They say this is what their take on this, or the writers. These observations seem perfectly valid insofar as they apply to static conceptions of utopias or to static metaphysical views. But there appear to be no necessary limitations on artistic creativity to portray the excitement of constructive, positive images of continuing human evolution, and in that sense to be able to create a vision of more, quote, more vivid utopias. So this to me is interesting. They say, these insights suggest that the most important component of planning is based not on the realm of the rational, but rather in those realms of consciousness that lie beyond the rational. This is interesting to me because, Margaret Mead actually has there's a little asterisk where Margaret Mead has her own comment on the quote of her that was used, where she says that, like so many quotes, the real point, the imagination of children, is omitted. And that to me is interesting because, Joseph Campbell, big influence on this book, probably one of the most lasting influences of Joseph Campbell, in addition to like, in ninth grade English class or whatever, is in Star Wars. That's what everyone, knows him from, is that his monomyth was a blueprint in many ways for Star Wars. Yep. And the idea of a evolving utopia based on like human development and evolution, that does make me think about like Disney and particularly like Marvel and superheroes.
Yeah. No,
like,
I think the entire MCU runs absolutely on a Joseph Campbell monomyth frame, like a structure. Every single movie.
More than that, it's a positive utopia that's not static, where there is a certain dualism, where there's baddies and goodies. Yeah. You know, but like things don't, like at the end of the day, the goodies win, you know, and things just keep ultimately getting better and better, and human beings, more and more special people like emerge, and you know, people become more and more powerful and more advanced. Really often in the exact terms, you know, again, like this is something that we harp on a lot, the like concept of evolution and the conceptual importance of evolution. That's hit on so much in this. Like the way that this is framed is evolution. It's all about evolution, how to deal with, you know, this idea. But that is really often an explicit idea in this stuff, like in X-Men, you know, or I don't know, I guess it's not, Spidey isn't really the same, where like X-Men are explicitly they're evolved. They're explicitly mutants that are a new like phase of human evolution, right? And you know, Spidey was bitten by a radioactive spider. You know, you could go all into the symbology there, but you know, there's still that kind of idea.
Well, so many superheroes were created by like Atomic Age,
Elon Musk, you know, exactly,
military-industrial complex.
Yeah, they were traveling into space, like, you know, they entered, you know, they got hit by gamma rays from Soklos or one of the Archons or something, and that turned them into, you know, super beings. So it's interesting that, you know, she mentioned like the imagination of children, because we have seen that borne out so much. And Joseph Campbell's like one actual note that I saw, like his actual words in the book, like one of the few things that he says is like, you know, we need to focus, I wish that the study focused more on art, not just as like a depiction, but as something that has the power to...
I wrote that down because it really jumped out at me, that Joseph Campbell quote. Let me see if I wrote down the actual thing. Yeah, exactly. I wrote, no, like Darth Vader at the end of it, because it's so prophetic. Yeah, the only thing I miss in the document is a recognition of the possible role of the arts, not simply as agents, quote, depicting a positive future, but as openers of the way to delight and a sense of fulfillment, not in some future, but now. I don't recall that we ever talked about the arts except in terms of the history of art, their role in the enrichment and harmonization of life, and the part that they might play in this role in the enrichment and harmonization of life. I repeated that. In structuring of any future civilization is a topic, I think, that could be given consideration. And then, like, 3 years later, Star Wars came out. So draw your own conclusions. But wow, somebody discovered the applicability of art as a way to harmonize life, and you know, basically, like
Star Wars also similar. Like, you know, there's obviously a dualism to it. You know, where there's goodies and baddies, but ultimately, like, and there's a dark side and a light side of the Force, you know, the
very magical.
Ultimately, but ultimately things get better, and like human beings like advance further, you know.
I mean, I guess now that I think about it, and I can't even remember what the plot of like the final movie of the new trilogy was. Basically, it was incredibly stupid. But the interesting thing that I think even some Star Wars heads, you know, fanboys got pretty mad about in kind of the new series was kind of just erasing. It did feel, at least at the end of the original trilogy, that monomyth thing, like arc, had been achieved, that they had achieved a qualitative advancement in the galactic civilization, in, you know, Luke Skywalker and all his friends were, you know, successful, and he had mastered the Force, he was a Jedi, and, you know, he even resolved like his daddy issues and things like that. But then the new series was like, oh, JK, like the baddies are back, and like in the preceding 20 years, like all the gains were lost. And so we're going to have to do this cycle all over again, which I don't know if that's not necessarily, maybe if that's in perfect alignment with Joseph Campbell, the kind of like there's like we're always going forward, but we're never done.
Yes, you exactly. Know? Well, there are things that are like kind of all over the place. Yeah, but like there are things that are all over the place about that. You know, I feel like you could get into the nitty gritty of it, but more and more people, like, will gain the force, and the baddies, like, they may return, but they will always be defeated, and, like, their defeat does cause progress, like more Jedi, like, will emerge, or something, I mean, really they kind of tell, like, similar stories, but I think that, it's that basically is a franchisization. I don't know what the future is. We have to do, like, a full sus Star Wars episode, because there's really so much susness and so much, like, occult, like, Dark Crystal type shit, like, going on in, like, Seth material stuff going on in Star Wars, that really is relevant here. I mean, something that sticks out to me from the final movie that I really thought had, like, just really slapped you in the face with, like, the way that this all pivots on the symbology is that at the end of the movie, spoiler alert for, like, the worst movie I've ever wasted my time seeing. So, like, in the very, very end, like, of course, Palpatine, the Emperor, comes back. He's been cloned, or cloned himself or something, and he's zapping Rey with electricity, and Rey grabs the lightsaber from Adam Driver, and she takes both of them, and then she, like, makes a cross shape, like, with these two lightsabers, and as the lightning is, like, crackling around, and it makes no sense, because I feel like there's something like, he's channeled, like, all the powers of the dark side or whatever, or, like, he's this mighty something like that, like, at the moment I was like, the only reason why, like, that this has any sense is, like, a symbolic sense, because she's making the shape of the cross the symbol of, like, this dialectical synthesis. That's the only way that, like, there's no rational reason why taking two swords and crossing them would allow you to, like, just kill this guy now. Like,
shoot back the electricity at him. That's never been established in that Star Wars movie.
Just because you have two now, like, one of them is, like, worthless, but, like, having two, like, just owns him completely. Like,
could
it makes
General Grievous
no
have, like, beaten the Emperor in hand-to-hand combat?
General Grievous could have destroyed anyone because he had four, so he could have made a whole swastika out of them. And, like,
no, but you're right. It's
really...
like that's clearly a reference which is not actually, like, kind of native to the Star Wars universe. It's clearly a reference that we will subliminally pick up on. That it's the cross fighting the satanic lightning, grotto leader who's the embodiment of all evil, and it's still even kind of Gnostic because she's the granddaughter of like kind of the devil himself and all his things.
Yeah, it is not, and of course the symbolism of the cross, as like in Renee Guénon's book by that title, is much broader. In this kind of conception of like the sort of a New Agey Jim Henson, Joseph Campbell, George Lucas conception of this stuff that will influence Star Wars. This cross is much broader than just Christianity. The cross represents like the fusion of, if you take an X and you
a rosy
like
cross.
Draw, yeah, exactly, a rosy cross. If you take an X and like you draw like a line around the points and then bring it, to one, you can that's the basis of like a yin yang and everything, like the
and a swastika.
Idea of, like this the Kai Rho, also exactly, swastika. A swastika, which is, of course, is a Hindu symbol for peace. But anyway, so that is a digression. But where they go from here is also pretty relevant because they go on from that point to talk about how, like I said, the most important component of planning is based not on the rational, but, realms of consciousness that lie beyond the rational. In many, if not most cultures throughout history, the executive leaders maintained access to seers, shamans, prophets, fools, medicine men, etc. I want to just see the asterisk here. Today, the seers are scientists and experts, says Michael Marion.
Not going to disagree with that. The scientists in their acolyte robes.
Yeah, definitely. There's a point to that. Although it has a little bit of like wokeness is the new religion to it. But scientists are well, it's definitely much more on point to say scientists are the new kind of priest. But anyway, so in keeping with the seriousness of the problems our society faces and the resulting need for a more valid sense of the whole context in which we live, the opening up of these aspects of consciousness, not for the few but for the many, seems of vital importance. Then from there, a pretty, generally nice idea, I guess, let's bring in some, religious stuff to expand our minds. That's all good. So where they go from there is to, and that, like, this is where they go. So these insights suggest that ordinary attempts to shift the prevailing image of humankind by rational, manipulative means would likely prove ineffectual. Other evidence, however, suggests that such a strategy, if it uses extraordinary means, might well be effective, but ultimately dysfunctional. Kinzer and Kleinman have written a provocative book, The Dream That Was No More a Dream, A Search for Aesthetic Reality in Germany, 1890 to 1945, which contends that during this recent era, the German government undertook to deliberately shape the image of man to create a quote-unquote myth that would resolve the Germans' identity crisis. There's so many, like, punctuation errors in this. Like, what was Pergamon Press doing? Like, you know, damned
I don't want to know what Robert Maxwell was doing.
Yeah, exactly. He was busy,
80s.
like... Exactly. Anyway, they're, like, trying to describe how this is possible, and they're like, one good example would be Nazi Germany. Using all the means at their disposal, some conventional, e.g. visual art, songs, slogans, and propaganda, and some unconventional, e.g. arm-in-arm rocking, goose step marching, and other somewhat more esoteric ways of releasing primal energies in a structural form, some of which have appeared from time to time in the American Human Potential movement. So that's very funny because, like, they... like, literally mention that as good. Like, the human potential movement as being good. Anyway, so, Germany created for itself a sense of national density in accord with the universe. Kinzer and Kleinman assert the central equation of this process was myth-shaped perception. Perceptions produce policies. Policies cause events and situations. And events require explanation. How can one separate the beginning of the circle from the end? The mythic invention from the archetypal situation, or the fabrication from the candid recognition of a geopolitical fact? The first feeds the last, and the last vindicates and reinstates the first. This cycle is what Freud meant by self-fulfilling prophecy, the manufactured statement that creates historical reality, thereby validating itself. True.
Okay.
So, the recent appearance of such writings as The Image, The Selling of the President, Catch a Falling Flag, The Image Makers, and Friendly Fascism, which I guess is an idea from Gross, would indicate that the German approach of image manipulation and myth creation is all too feasible in the United States. Image manipulation is practiced in our society, but has not yet reached the proportions that were practiced in Germany before World War II. As we note in the next chapter, however, an extrapolation of current trends makes this possibility seem almost expected. Martin, writing almost 2 decades ago, concluded that the whole world is in imminent peril from the totalitarian technique. The free peoples, because they are still free, have the means of making the withdrawal and return, of rediscovering the creative contact by rediscovering themselves. There can be no assurance that they will fully realize this peril or make use of these means. But if they do, a fundamental change can come over the world. There is in this present age a possibility of greatness exceeding all that has gone before. The possibility that our time of troubles can become the timeless moment, the moment of vision and commitment. And, in fairness to the reader, it should be emphasized that this creative contact is not an armchair pursuit. What is proposed is an experiment involving risk, making heavy demands on those who undertake it with no guarantee of results. Mythos meant originally the words spoken in a ritual, the means of approach to the god. There are a variety of modern means of approach to the creative process working in and through man. And, as always, the creative is dangerous. I definitely agree with that. So, their thing is, although not without danger, this is the authors again, the democratic assumption is that pluralistic creativity is always more to be trusted than is fascistic manipulation. All right.
From Margaret Mead. Yeah.
That's nice.
Ooh, but wow, a lot going on there.
Yes, definitely a lot going on. Yeah.
So they think that the levels of image manipulation that were present in Nazi Germany, given the extrapolation of current trends, they think is almost expected, and maybe even inevitable.
Expected.
Yeah.
Yes.
Interesting.
And maybe even inevitable. I like the phrasing it in terms of all the democratic assumption is that pluralistic creativity is always more to be trusted than is fascistic manipulation. I love for one they italicize always, like as if to say like stop what you're thinking. Well, it's almost like trying to say like no, like bad reader, don't. But it's also like kind of saying like the democratic assumption is, so that's a democratic assumption, but it's not, it's not just saying
they're not necessarily endorsing the democratic
pluralistic. Exactly. They're like, they would just cut out like the democratic assumption is that, Like if you cut that out and just said, although not without danger, pure artistic creativity is always more to be trusted than artistic manipulation, then you would be saying that. But what you're doing is saying the democratic assumption, in a paper that's like hardly objective, like it's very odd. It's like now I'm being objective about like, whether fascistic manipulation is better than democratic creativity or whatever, like.
No, they're just taking a hands-off, scientific approach.
Exactly.
They're not making value judgments, even though they talk all the time in this about how like you need to have moral
we're not making value judgments. Yeah, Hinduism is better than Judaism. Anyway,
I don't know. There's also like the quote from Martin that, he meant, it sounds very extremely sus. I guess he's writing in 1955. He says it's not an armchair. He's, again, sounding like David Myatt. What is proposed is an experiment involving risk, making heavy demands on those who undertake it with no guarantee of results. And then he says, out of nowhere, mythos meant originally the words spoken in a ritual, the means of approach to the god. And, then says the creative is dangerous. So he's like, is he trying to contact, I don't know. You almost could read into that, like, we want to undertake an occult project where we maybe want to, yes, maybe he's speaking just like euphemistically, but it's an interesting thing to bring up that, when we're all talking about mythos, we're actually, it's this thing that actually is rooted in like occult rituals, like ancient occult rituals. And it's like dangerous and it's a means of approaching the god.
They explicitly say that it is based in like ancient occult rituals. Repeatedly.
The question is whether any of them were actively involved, since they were so interested in this stuff, if any of them were kind of involved to any degree with any kind of occult group that maybe was informing between their mentions of Freemasonry and their weird little...
It almost seems certainly that there was, at least to an extent, like at least like proto-Esalen type stuff. The Institute of Noetic Sciences more or less is Esalen.
And maybe when they're talking about things like Freemasonry, they're actually kind of thinking of themselves and their Esalen crowd as kind of the new Freemasonry. Yeah.
Well,
which then makes me wonder, like, is there a continuity between the old Freemasonry and Esalen? I can't say for sure. I know that it was founded by people from Stanford. So
they saw there as being one. It's the same thing, I feel like their religion or like their idea is like an Idris Shah type idea where there's, like we said, there's like a long tradition that has gone through these different forms, and like we are the inheritors of it. So maybe we're not like formal initiates of a Freemasonic order per se, but like we're exploring these things and keeping like this flame that really is the same thing, like in as cringe as this and wrong as this idea is, like the same thing in like all the quote unquote secret society of the Sufis. The poor Gnostic heretics and the Rosicrucians and the Freemasons, etc. Like now our little Esalen buddies, who are like the disciples of L. Ron Hubbard or like whatever, like we're
OTO,
we're
etc.
Yeah, exactly.
They all, but it does seem to have gone through a change.
Or that
in the 20th
guy
century.
who like Jack Sarfati,
Walter Breen
or
Werner Erhard, the Est guy.
Yeah, Erhard, right.
Yeah, who's connected to all kinds of people and definitely connected to Esalen and all this like transpersonal psychology. A lot of people were in it. A lot of the people that worked on this report were heavily involved in that stuff.
We should emphasize like how much they were into parapsychology, basically, like psychic
Yes, I did want to bring that up.
They mention that like all the time. Like, just shortly thereafter that, they talk about how we need a new policy paradigm that provides a far closer reconciliation of C.P. Snow's two cultures, the sciences and the humanities, the reconciliation of the objective inquiry methods for learning to manipulate the external physical environment, and the inquiry methods that are emerging to similarly explore the subjective internal psychical environment of our living. Likely, such an umbrella paradigm will not be possible without the emergence of other, somewhat more specialized but nevertheless holistic paradigms to support it. An adequate policy-relevant paradigm for understanding the subtle complexities of ecology, for example, will require a creative synthesis of those disciplines we call biology, anthropology, ethology, Nazi discipline, and possibly even parapsychology. Similarly, literally, like Lorenz, like a straight-up Nazi, like one of the biggest figures in shaping the idea of ethology. So similarly, which all these people just love, like it's like, look at the monkeys doing their rituals, just like us. Anyway, Similarly, an adequate new science of internal states, which would deal with topics as varied as psychosomatic medicine, creativity, quality of life, and so-called psychic abilities, if present trends are any indication, will require a synthesis of Eastern wisdom, Western psychology, electronic engineering, physics, physiology, etc. I don't know what they mean by physiology. Maybe gym class or like physiognomy. I don't know. But anyway, like yeah. I mean, they do quote Julian Huxley at the very beginning of the book is like one of the epigraphs. Yeah, but this is also very MK Ultra type stuff because it's all about like, oh, we need to. It's just very important that we come up with a hierarchized or like a systematized a framework for understanding like internal states. You know, we need like a science of people's psychologies, you know, which of course will only be used for good purposes, you know, like, and it's totally like just no one will use it for any bad reasons, etc.
Absolutely not. Well, as long as democratic assumptions prevail, I guess, you know, nothing
as long as democratic. Yes, they actually go on from there to talk about, you know, what indications are there that pervasive personal and institutional transformation and a creative mustering of new paradigms are feasible without their being quote-unquote caused. So this is like where they start to bring up the issue of like what is the morality of like making people, like manipulating people, basically
changing their images, changing their images.
Yeah, exactly.
They said, you know, there can be no easy answer to this question, of course.
Yes.
The forces against fundamental conceptual change appear almost inseparable. Virtually every institutionalized aspect of our society, but especially the image-creating media, whose revenues, hence editorial policy, currently derived primarily from advertising, indirectly support the current industrial paradigm. The physical aspects of our culture, urban-centered factories, freeways, automobiles, etc., all reinforce it by shaping our perceptions, incentives, and habits. However, there appear sufficient indications of a new image emerging that continued work in this direction is indeed appropriate. We outline in Chapter 4 a historical analogy between the present and the post-medieval period that is suggestive of various forces at work which are creating the conditions for a transformation. Added to that line of argument are the following assessments of societal conditions that together indicate, with appropriate stimulation, the feasibility of a, quote, new renaissance, which would have the characteristics set forth in Chapter 5. And I guess these are their, like, preconditions. Okay,
so this is, like, my thing, like, again, like, they just, like, it's so ridiculous, like, how much they waffle back and forth and contradict themselves. Like, for instance, saying, they say, like, you know, we need a new renaissance. Well, that's when, like, you know, the Spanish, evil Western European Catholics were going to, you know, who are, of course, Judeo-Christian, so that's bad. And obviously committing genocide is bad. So, which they did, you know, during
I mean, they don't really bring it up that much in this report, you know?
They don't mention it. It's actually really funny because, like, there is a note from some guy who's like, you mentioned Hitler, but, yeah, he says, while you note briefly the societal manipulations of the Third Reich under Hitler, you do not deal with the consequences of this tragedy. You know, this is from Robert A. Smith, too. Yeah, you know, and he also says, you know, you should talk about Mao or whatever, but it's like, you know, his point about, like, you mentioned Hitler, but then you kind of, like, don't really talk about how awful that was, or, like, seem to have, like, a real sense of, it's kind of like an Aquino thing, where it's like, yes, of course, you know, there were all these horrible things that happened, but their magical understanding was quite sophisticated. You know, it's like, okay, like, like, if only they didn't do the fundamental aspect of genocide, which is inextricable from their entire philosophy, then, you know...
Yeah, exactly. Just leave that little part out, and it should be fine.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, so I guess the things that the characteristics that make the new Renaissance feasible with appropriate stimulation are these things. They said, 1, there is need. Societal problems, such as those described in Chapter 2, are mounting that appear to be intrinsic to the very structure of the mature industrial society. Similarly, there is growing evidence that a variety of goals cannot be adequately realized due to intrinsic limitations of the essentially objective and reductionistic paradigm of science that is currently dominant in our society. The next one, there are motivation and progress. Although the societal trends that appear to be dominant and the overall momentum of industrialism do not point to the emergence of a new and more adequate image of the human, there are various signs indicating increasing desire for the progress towards such an emergence. For example,
This example that he gives is like my favorite part, like, of the whole thing. Like, not like obviously ironically, like, it's just like so stupid and awful. Anyway, yeah.
It really encapsulates a certain vibe in the 70s in a nutshell. So interest in cultural survival, in Eastern thought, in self-exploration, in holistic understanding of complex systems, in personal and cultural transformation is in the ascendant. Surveys and polls show this growing trend, most noticeably in the Yankelovich data on the new naturalism among such groups as student elites and corporate executives who are increasingly turning away from economic values. A survey of major public libraries made in connection with this study reveals an unusually strong demand for books on wholesome living, natural organic foods, yoga for health, the occult, extrasensory processes, divination, esoteric wisdom, and Eastern practices, Zen, yoga, meditation, etc., while the more fundamentalist of the traditional churches are growing at a rate about equal to the decline of the more ecumenical traditional
once
churches.
Again. Thank you, Robert Maxwell, for like not proofing the book. Anyway, sorry.
Traditional churches, other voluntary organizations, especially in what is called the quote human potential movement, are growing far more rapidly. Two pages
ago, they said that the human potential movement had like similarities with Nazism. And then they're like, well, this is like, now that thankfully we're seeing some growth in the human potential movement, so now that's good. That's a good sign. Like, what? Well, it was 2 pages ago.
Yeah, exactly. And this next one just feels like it's a time bomb of interesting things that would come to pass later.
Yeah. Mm-hmm,
so
true.
Number 2, population growth is declining, environmentalism is growing, new legislation is being considered that might promote more holistic understandings of societal problems. For example, Senator Humphrey's recent bill on national growth policy. Increasing numbers of technical symposia and ad hoc groups are being formed on the theme of survival-motivated transformation, e.g. the World Order Models Project, the Club of Rome, which I think Maxwell was involved in sponsoring the World Order Models Project. I think this is actually published as part of his series in the World Order Models Project.
Awesome.
And the Blueprint for Survival Project, the International Institute of Applied Systems Analysis, projects of the National and World Council of Churches. That's an interesting one to throw in there at the end. And I guess they say there are recognizable processes of transformational discovery. The historical record of cultures and individuals which successfully coped with crisis-motivated change, the process of new paradigm discovery in science, and the process of general creativity show some remarkable parallels. 2 characteristics which stand out in the record of such discoveries are, 1, that they are intuitively rather than rationally based. In most descriptions of transformational discovery, the tapping of imagistic, intuitive, and super-rational aspects of consciousness appears as a central element of discovery. Only before and after the new gestalt is recognized do the more rational processes serve the useful functions of evaluation, planning, and so forth. 2, that they reformulate rather than replace previous ideas. Although both types of creativity occur in times of crisis, the type of discovery that has led to revitalization of a culture is that in which the creative thrust was more a reformulation of capitalism, let's say, and a combination of ideas already having good currency than a revolutionary change to radically different ideas. Thus, cultural transformation seems feasible without revolutionary disruptions. To the extent that the transformed society can meet the unique and habitual needs of diverse groups while at the same time providing a unifying framework for the entire culture. Techniques exist with which transformational discovery can be fostered. Others can be discovered. That's hilarious. And I guess then there is the last bullet point here is there is timely stimulation of attempts, both individual and collective, to foster an evolutionary transformation. Okay, so somebody's got to do something to stimulate this. The majority of the society do not perceive the need or have the motivation noted above. This is perhaps fortunate, for it gives time to create the needed ideas before charismatic leadership and or simplistic attempts to reform are demanded. although there is, among an increasing number of elites, a perceived need, motivation, some progress, and proper tools, yet small in proportion to the need, most funding, understandably, goes into work that fits within the present paradigms of our culture. The efficacy of transformational research and working toward more adequate paradigms has yet to be demonstrated to the mainstream institutions of society. Thus, support of this kind of activity could prove to have, here we go, quote, high leverage, just like Kettering Foundation wanted, in terms of building the kinds of knowledge and necessary experience that might turn cultural crisis into creative transformation. So that's kind of what they're after. And, if you look at kind of the rise of Silicon Valley and then the 1980s kind of culture, it really does seem like there was some timely stimulation of attempts, and it was guided towards reformulating the previous ideas, i.e., capitalism, imperialism, basically, of the system we had, into something reformulated, which is now like techno-stakeholder neoliberal capitalism. Right?
It's amazing. It's just absolutely amazing that, he would say, whoever, whichever one of the multiple authors wrote this particular part would say that because people are taking yoga and organic food books out of the library and books about the occult and about Zen and meditation, that means that, we're going to change paradigms, or something like that, or that, there's a human potential movement is growing. It's and it shows how incredibly narrow and basically just exactly a totally bourgeois professor brain student elites are going to they're going to seed the ideas.
It's very SDS brained, and not in an Oglesby way.
Before people realize that there's a crisis and they rate simplistic demands for reform, we have the opportunity to create, more sophisticated approaches to transformation. Or it's all right.
The way I read that is if we do this in advance, we can come up with a plan so we don't need to messily assassinate Fred Hampton and Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, and make ourselves look bad. Before any charismatic, uncontrolled radical leader rises up, from the masses and starts doing something we don't like, we want to control this process. It's basically saying that change is coming whether everybody likes it or not, and we need to get out in front of it, or else it's gonna hit you, it's gonna sideswipe you potentially, and it's gonna take forms that you don't like, which means it's gonna maybe threaten capitalism and the superstructure, and both ideologically and then maybe physically in the dialectic, and it's just, you're going to be in a dangerous situation. So we need, we have these tools now, and they're just kind of coyly pointing out look what Nazi Germany was able to accomplish in just such a short time, and maybe with a little more deftness and a little more tact and things like that, maybe a little more covert of a aspect, maybe some of those things, just like a Werner von Braun's rocket, expertise could be weaponized, and all those MK Ultra Nazi scientists that got brought over. Why not take a little, put that little ring on. Don't throw it into Mount Doom. Maybe we'll just use it for a little bit of stuff. But I think even that is a little bit disingenuous in terms of maybe their attraction to those ideas and their how cool they are with the kind of fascistic totalitarian control. It's almost so weird because they don't. I would have expected them to take more pot shots at maybe totalitarian communism or collectivism or something like that, and kind of spell out why that's totally a bad road, or saying we don't want to go down this road, or this is an example of a negative direction, of an image changing, even bringing up things like, I don't know, the cult of personality. I had a thought there, but now it slipped away from me about this passage that we just read. Oh yeah, you know what? The other thing, I would even go deeper than what you said in terms of acting a bunch of kids buying occult books and stuff, and the rise of the human potential movement is totally gonna introduce a new paradigm and stuff. I think he is kind of doing Professor Brain and being really kind of ridiculous, and maybe in some sense overhyping his very niche subculture that's there in based probably primarily in California at that time. However, a lot of the people that went into building this report or editing it or working on it, etc., were like deeply involved with the entire, like, not just what became the human potential movement, but all the stuff that led up to it, like all of the acid test, MK Ultra shit in the early 60s. So it's like they even them just being like, hey, look over there's this like human potential movement that's getting so popular, how interesting, and not like owning up to the fact that like, yeah, we've all been super on this tip since like 1961, and we've all been like before the LSD revolution, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's so it's like they're not showing their full hand in terms of how they're deeply invested. It's like promoting like a stock or something, or I don't know, a cryptocurrency that you've secretly bought like a huge amount of, and then you go out and start running around and telling everybody how important and great it's going to be. It's a little bit of like they're kind of hyping their own work without like really copying without really disclosing like probably their intimate involvement.
Definitely, they yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, of course, like, because, yeah, of course, that they, like, have a personal investment in it, and, like, they think that it's awesome. Well, not only do they think that it's awesome, like, as outside, like, interested observers or something, like, obviously, I mean, these are the type of things where, like, if you like it that much, like, obviously, like, you kind of in some way participate in it, and a lot of these people, like, we know did. I did like Michael Marion, who like is, like we said, like kind of a futurist like guy who's like a little bit weird and like controversial in his own right. But I did like his comment on it where he was like, "Do you think the cultural survival lobby, broadly defined, outnumbers the supporters of Maharaj Ji, the John Birch Society? Would you care to contrast the readership of any 5 new culture periodicals to the 160,000 subscribers?" To Street Chopper magazine, to the 175,000 subscribers to Off-Road Vehicles magazine.
Ouch. Damn.
Yeah.
But you know what though?
It's just like,
I think that's a good burn. I'll give him props for that. At the same time though, I think, it's something that I even think about in terms of new media nowadays, and how I think we all know that certain ideas, depending on the audience that they're aimed at, can have a kind of disproportionate influence despite a mass audience not really being aware of them.
Yes. Yeah, and I mean, I think that's kind of like a premise that maybe, ironically, perhaps, Michael Marion is having certain democratic assumptions that I think are not actually present in the idea that, like, student elites, like, I mean, this would drive a MAGA person insane, because it's like campus culture is obviously gonna drive society,
and corporate executives that want to look woke, like, it's like,
right,
like,
Yeah, Marion also points out that, like, this is the same note where he says, like, I think you should be more skeptical of humanistic capitalism, like, such as in John Rockefeller's recent book, The Second American Revolution.
Wow. I'd like to read that one.
Ever heard of co-optation? Yeah. Right, yeah, The Second American, awesome, yeah.
It is also interesting that for all that actually is, now that I'm thinking about it, it stands out more glaringly. This was written in the early 70s, not the early 60s, or earlier. So it happened after the first big wave of like this kind of new agey, Age of Aquarius counterculture thing that really sprang directly out of Palo Alto and Stanford, and like it like spread to San Francisco more than like kind of vice versa. And if like we wanted to identify kind of a ground zero, I mean, there's maybe a couple, like Leary said, they had their agents in Los Angeles and obviously Cambridge, like MIT and Harvard, with Richard Alpert and Leary and some other people, and the Millbrook Estate in New York. There are a couple nodes of this thing, but Stanford was so central to it, and they don't really reckon with, unlike say Don Henley, they do not reckon with like the traumatic clusterfuck of like the 1960s and all the, even though it's in the background obviously of like everything that they're talking about, that we're kind of reaching a point of like a crossroads and like a potential moment where our current model isn't working anymore and stuff, but they don't really reference like actual like political activism or just like political tensions. And they don't really talk about politics at all. They're on such a high perch of like talking about cultural kind of anthropology and mythos and things like that, and psychology and things like systems theory, but they're just kind of acting as if like the actual politics of what people are conflicting about and struggling about and all these other things, not to mention like all the I don't think the Vietnam War gets even a passing mention once in this entire thing. It's very bizarre in that, and just how it's like they don't talk about, they don't really bring up the Soviet Union, they don't bring up the Cold War.
Yeah, it's only in the notes that people mention like the current political climate at all, because like that's when people are just flabbergasted. For all their like the readers of this like aren't like the coolest or like the the most rock on people, but even there, like, are you like this seems like completely disconnected from reality. Saying this stuff like, oh yeah, we're entering a new paradigm because like people taking out the occult books or whatever. Like, I think the flip side of what you're saying, where it's like pumping and dumping like your own stock in occult books and the human potential movement and whatever, like it's also kind of like puffing up the people who it's intended for, like all of your shit, and how great like these great corporations like could help to the most important thing, and like if you just like do yoga, then you're gonna save the world, and
that came true. That shit came true. Like Silicon Valley tech companies will have yoga retreats, and they'll have little like nap rooms, and they'll give you all these, they'll give you like a health allowance, and they have spiritual retreats and blah blah blah, and they encourage mindfulness meditation and all this other crap, and they're getting more, and they're increasingly, especially in the last like couple years, they're jumping on the bandwagon of like, we are the vanguard party essentially of like positive social change. Essentially, that it's like when Nike stands up for like Black Lives Matter, or Chevron like stands up for girl bosses or something, like that is really what's going to move the needle in progress.
Or like
and
goes to Davos or whatever or helps with the Great Reset plan, plans to restructure everything. I mean, and it's like the sort of, it's so funny because like so much of this is like we need to get away from like these hierarchy, like whatever, like these horrible Semitic / industrial hierarchies, like, but it's gotten worse, and like all implicit in all of this is this idea of like this enlightened, like a vanguard party or enlightened group that, in consultant with like the quote unquote fools and shamans and medicine men, will like Stephen Greer or whatever, are gonna like almost literally. Like, are
really,
going
I mean,
to,
like James, like Fadiman,
the transcendental meditation stuff is like part of this,
and like, Hubbard, L. Ron Hubbard himself, they kind of endorse, and the Maharishi, those people. It's
actually worth it to read that little screed where he like mentions Scientology explicitly, because like it's very funny, like the stuff that he blurs it in with. He says like, additionally, it now appears possible to combine the insights of science, art, and religion so as systematically to reduce the fear of yet unknown discovery and to foster the abilities of normal persons to discover and apply more of their creative potential. Such approaches as synectics, group dynamics, psychosynthesis, Scientology, psychedelic drugs, integral yoga, self-hypnosis, biofeedback training, small conferencing, imagistic thinking, specific educational programs, and others typify the diversity of ways in which one or a group of individuals with an appropriate set and setting, with an appropriate set, such as the Dark Prince, can be helped to make the type of conceptual breakthroughs here being discussed. If the emerging science of consciousness discussed in Chapter 4 is turned towards these ends, it seems obvious that even more effective approaches would result. Scientology, definitely a great way to foster the abilities of normal persons to discover and apply more of their creative potential. Just great.
Talk about a great technology of human potential. Set and Setting is also, I think, was popularized by Tim Leary. So, same old gang. And, that specifically refers to like an LSD trip, but they're extrapolating it to kind of any kind of ritualized group therapy dynamic, which is just so sus. This whole list of I actually hadn't even heard of synectics before. The whole list is
incredibly sus. Yeah, there's tons of things there. Like, I have not heard of psychosynthesis. That's something I have not heard of. It sounds incredibly sus and but I have not. I mean, I assume it's just like some typical thing. Yeah, it's an approach to psychology that expands the boundaries of the field by identifying a deeper center of identity, which is the postulate of the self. All right, yeah, exactly. It's just like all this stuff, let's analyze the self and figure out how to make you, do whatever we want.
Yeah, and I think actually even the psychedelic drugs, I just want to put out there, I'm pretty sure, because I want to check if this is the masters in Houston, who wrote the varieties of, they wrote one book. Yeah, The Varieties of Psychedelic Experience, the classic guide to the effects of LSD on the human psyche. And yes, that was written by Robert Augustus Masters, PhD. And I know somebody, I have a friend who grew up on Robert Masters' cult compound in Oregon.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and told me that's the first time I'd ever heard of him. But apparently, in the 70s and 80s, he was very big on basically. He founded the Foundation of Human Understanding. He actually just died last month, in April 2021. So he was 93. Yeah, he was, I think, an army psychologist who then became an academic. And then got really into hypnosis, and then moved to Los Angeles in 1961 and started the Foundation for Human Understanding. He bought a lot of gold and made a bunch of money in 1980 by selling it all, and then purchased a ranch in Oregon, and then he built this cult where he brought tons of people to, and apparently it was extremely MK and fucked up, and he could almost have his own episode one day, but that was that's a personal story that was relayed to me. It was I grew up in this guy's cult, and he was a human potential movement leader who was kind of a Christian preacher, but was a hypnosis expert, LSD weirdo MK Ultra guy who wouldn't let children listen to music because it was evil or something like that. He had a lot of really bizarre rule. It was very sus and Scientology, just part of the whole milieu. So they're just casually right next to Scientology. They're oh yeah, psychedelic drugs, masters in Houston. Just these cool guys that are just researching LSD, and they're just talking about, this is a list of cults basically of mind control cults. That they're basically looking at look at this great thing we could be doing. So it's also during that period where I believe, maybe when we get to our Jim Jones episode one day, that there was a shift in the MK project going out of the 60s. I think there was a shift in 65, 66 when it got quote it got outlawed, and then escape the lab, and then the 60s happened. And then I think in the 70s they kind of moved on a little bit from just using the primacy of kind of using LSD, and they founded all these kind of radical new religious movement type groups, some of which were kind of ostensibly Christian, maybe some were ostensibly Muslim or some kind of new agey thing. And I think that was it was a way to basically practice, maybe it was this kind of pseudo Maoist kind of technique of, it's why all those communes had a weird, they weren't Maoists, but they were all using at least what maybe the kind of Western view of what a Maoist struggle session was, but they were doing encounter therapy that was inspired by Synanon and shit like that, and kind of, it was supposed to be radical and break down all the hierarchies and do all these things and blah blah blah, and they all kind of spiraled out of control into these very toxic authoritarian situations full of sus lords, even Occupy in a way, because it insisted on this process, this horizontal process that was new and kind of liberated from the traditional Nazarene scum hierarchies that we've all been programmed to ride with. But at the end of the day, when you have a kind of didn't I mention that that feminist essay from, I think it was from Red Stockings, called like The Tyranny of Structurelessness. It was a really great essay that published in the 70s that I think was, I forget it was a critique of Gloria Steinem or just of other groups in general that were adopting this hyper like progressive stack, like nobody's a leader, we're all equal, we have to have struggle sessions, and then talked about how that's like can kind of be a smokescreen for something kind of like, I don't know, at the very least like chaotic and not well organized, but also something almost like fashy and culty. And, you know, it's like more toxic than just having a express leader that like everybody elects, you know, like a democratic centralism, for example.
This is like a good example. Yeah. And that like current is running through like this whole thing. I feel like the tension between like, oh, you know, everyone, I mean, it's a common tension like in, you know, American society especially in these types of discourses in general, but the tension between like, democracy or like, horizontalism or cybernetic systems, and also like, you know, they love like Greek tragedy, like classical myths, like, you know, which like are pretty all about basically like tyranny and like great men. But like, this is a Saucy Joseph Campbell quote that gets quoted at one point in this. He says, "For even in the sphere of waking consciousness, the fixed and the steadfast, there is nothing now that endures. The known God cannot endure. Whereas formerly, for generations, life so held to establish norms of the lifetime of a deity could be reckoned in millennia, today all norms are in flux so that the individual is thrown willy-nilly back upon himself into the inward sphere of his own becoming, his forest adventurous without way or path, to come through his own integrity and experience to his own intelligible castle of the Grail." I love, good choice, you know, to his own Himmler Black Sun room with his dagger. Integrity and courage, an experience in love and loyalty and an act, in honor anyway. And to this end, the guiding myths can no longer be of any ethnic norms. No sooner learned, these are outdated, out of place, washed away. Today there are no mythogenetic zones, or rather, the mythogenetic zone is the individual heart. Individualism and spontaneous pluralism, the free association of men and women of like spirit, under the protection of a secular, rational state with no pretensions of divinity, are in the modern world the only honest possibilities, each the creative center of authority for himself, in Kusanus circle without circumference whose center is everywhere, and where each is the focus of God's gaze. So, for one, this, like, contradicts, like, a lot of stuff that is in the thing itself, like, and also is kind of, like, inherently contradictory because, like, the whole, you know, is this so easily transferable? And, like, the whole idea of, like, you know, individualism, like, under a rational secular state, like, this is all, like, the theology of, like, individualism and, like, the liberal, autonomous, economic man is, like, the whole problem that they have. But anyway, right after that quote, they say, "We would thus hope not for a handful, but for 1,000 heroes, 10,000 heroes, who will create a future image of what humankind can be." So this is interesting for many reasons. The idea of heroism, especially, like, again, in the context of even the Marvel type, you know, Star Wars type stuff, you know, in the Joseph Campbell context. But more than that, like, it's an interesting tension between, like, you know, what they say, like, the idea of heroism, of course, you know, a hero is a special person. You know, not everyone can be the hero. That's not what a hero is. Like, there's, you know, they're kind of trying to have it both ways, but they can't quite go, they can't say, like, we want to have, you know, 5 billion heroes or however many people on Earth there were in,
just a vanguard of heroes.
1974, like, or even
like a vanguard party.
Yeah, exactly. Like, but not a small, you know, 10,000 heroes. All right?
Huh.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know. Is that like, what the Gifted Children programs are for?
Exactly.
You know, to get 10,000 little heroes.
We're gonna call it the God phone. You know, the call to adventure. The God
it was a call to. It certainly was a call to adventure, wasn't it? Yep.
Yes. It was
and you
call
even
to
have to put a little, like, you know.
Then they encounter the wise mentor figure, Walter Breen, you know, who,
God,
Gandalf, if you will, who will teach them. They talk about paideia in this as well, the Greek idea of paideia. That's a great part too, because they talk about, like, you know, Athens, classical Athens was so great, you know, and we need to have a culture like that, but. Of course, you know, in our future, the slaves will be machines and not actual human beings. Like, okay, well, who's gonna build the machines?
That was actually an interesting point. That was an interesting point where they basically kept saying that the ancient Greeks had grasped most of the fundamentals of the scientific method and the kind of the rational framework of like scientific investigation, but they didn't really do anything with it because they had slaves. And thus they had no economic need or incentive to create labor-saving technologies because they just had slaves they could do it for, which is an interesting thing that they brought up several times. I'm like, well, now we don't have that.
Yeah, they love that idea. And yes.
But like we also, the early really industrialization did have slaves. Like, it's weird.
Exactly. Like, it's the whole idea of, like, the cotton gin. You know, like, the cotton gin, like, it saves work, but... Like, of course, as we know from, you know, maybe, I don't know if they still teach this, hopefully they do, it seems kind of like an important concept, like, that was something that, like, made the system of chattel slavery all the worse. That accelerated things, like the, you know, invention of this, you know, machine that would be, like, you know, allow this to...
They could massively increase output, right?
Yeah, exactly, and so...
Basically. And same with industrialization in the North.
Like slavery accelerated.
They even brought that up slavery, I think even early on they brought that up as like just a curious phenomenon in the development of like industrialization that we think that the creation, even though they accept that framing of like the Greek thing of like, well, they would have invented labor saving technologies if they didn't have slaves. And they're like, well, in our situation, one would expect that if you created new technologies that saved labor, then that would ease the burden of... Actually, no, I'm sorry. I think I was reading some Henry George the other day. I got that mixed up. And he was making this point, which is also... Yeah, they don't mention that at all. And, Marx obviously talked about this, is like, isn't it interesting that as you create more technology that saves labor and automates it, that the share of the labor, like the conditions don't get better for the laborer. They get better for the capitalist that owns the technology. So it's like, it's not something, even though sometimes the optimistic projection or hope is that, if we all have, robot kiosks and stuff, then we can all just hang out all day and live in like a cyber communist utopia. But obviously not, because you don't get any of you don't profit share in the automation of technology. The owner of the technology profits. And so that's like a huge issue that Changing Images of Man just like doesn't engage with at all.
This paragraph actually is amazing. Like, they say, they're talking about the learning society, using Athens as an example. They quote Robert Hutchins. They say, its values are transformed in such a way that learning, fulfillment, becoming human had become its aims, and all its institutions were directed to this end. This is what the Athenians did. They made their society, this is so romanticized and ridiculous, they made their society one designed to bring all its members into the fullest development of their highest powers. Education was not a segregated activity, but except between, like, men and women, conducted for certain hours in certain places at a certain time of life. It was the aim of the society. The Athenian was educated by culture, by paideia. Let's linger on the connotations of this word. But anyway, the central... there was a very big component of education, what you think about when you hear that. But anyway, the central educational task fostered by paideia...
The mentoring, are you referring to?
Yeah, there's a certain aspect of mentorship. The similarity between, like, paideia, pedagogy, and other words that use that root, like, is not incidental. But anyway, the central educational task fostered by paideia was the search for the divine center. It was search for some... But anyway, the post-industrial society would differ from that of Athens in important respects. Its slaves will be machines. And this is a very weird part. With the Faustian powers of its technology introduced to a new level of responsibility. Why are they using the word Faustian to mean something good?
I don't know. Good question.
What?
Why are they?
It's kind of like a weird thing where it's like, Rudolf Steiner being like, well, slum Luciferianism is good, Lucian Greaves being like, Satan has nothing to do with evil. It must thus become not only a social learning society, but a social planning society. Helping to choose the future, then, would be the primary responsibility of citizens. So everyone would be absolved of their labor responsibilities by having, luxury space, communism with robot slaves.
Robot slaves.
Faustian robot slaves.
Faustian robot golems, basically, it sounds like.
Yes.
The one thing in Jewish tradition that they will accept is having a bunch of golems running around.
Yes, I guess.
Just as a fun side note, I know I had heard Paideia before. I forget if somebody we covered had like a PhD
like a Paideia Institute or something.
Yeah,
I think somebody did.
And
I think actually
was it Robert Anton Wilson?
Yeah, it was Robert Anton Wilson. It was Robert.
Yeah,
Anton
let me
Wilson.
just double check that, because there is something that was called. It was okay. So there's two different ones. Yeah, he received a BA, an MA, and a PhD in psychology from Paideia University, an unaccredited institution that has since closed. And he wrote his dissertation there, which was republished as Prometheus Rising. So there we go again with kind of the like Faust, Prometheus, and also unrelated to that, there was like a more recent thing called the Paideia Institute, which I guess was a kind of a nonprofit dedicated to like promoting studying the classical languages. And I found an article from like Yale Daily News from 2019 where the classics department was considering severing ties with the Paideia Institute because of allegations of sexual assault and misconduct and other things of that nature. So they got in a little trouble. I guess that's somehow groups. I don't know. I guess they think the other people have accused them of creating an environment that's hostile to people of color, women, students from working class backgrounds, the LGBTQ community, and other marginalized group. And then one student claimed that a staff member sexually harassed them and prevented them from learning Latin during a summer program. So, okay, another student also accused Paideia staff of holding white supremacist views and undermining the value of equity and diversity in the workplace. Another account called one Paideia employee a fascist. So right, I guess, nice. I don't know. So, I mean, who knows if that's kind of like hot language with some hot grad student language of saying they're like literally a fascist. But given that, I don't know. Yeah. And also the classism of it is kind of interesting, that you don't hear that kind of added into the mix when people are doing bad things these days. But I guess it is, at Yale. So, I guess they're pretty highfalutin organization. I guess that's how they see themselves. I don't know. I tried to find out stuff about Paideia University, where Robert Anton Wilson went, but I was not able to really dig up much about them. Except, I guess there was an article called Lawsuit U from 2006 from the Chronicle of Higher Education. Well, we do have a Robert Anton Wilson coming up, so maybe we'll dig into that later.
Still don't know what I was waiting for. Time is running wild. A million dead-end streets. Every time I thought I'd got it made, it seemed the taste was not so sweet. Then I turned myself to face me, but I never caught a glimpse of how the others must see the faker. I'm much too fast to take that test. Changes. Changes. They wanna have to be a richer man. Changes. Just wanted to be a better man. Time may change me. I can't trace time.
I just wanted to note that I actually did a Control F for their other uses of Faustian. And I actually remembered noticing this, but not really thinking about it earlier. I guess it's a reference to the book The Decline of the West by Oswald Spengler, which is a bit of a sus book in general, but he actually is the person who, I believe, he came up with the idea of calling Nazarene scum Magians, something that you also might recognize from David Mamet. The idea of, Muslim Jews and Christians, Muslim Jewish Christian civilization, or even Zoroastrian civilization or whatever being, Magian. Yeah, and he called, like, the modern West, starting in the 10th century or something. is Faustian, you know. But the whole idea of that book is that we're doomed to never reach the actual goal, and that it still has the kind of tragic connotation. So like when, you know, they're even like more outrageous in this like sus, like weird kind of like proto-Nazi-ish like book, you know, by Oswald Spengler, you know. Which is, you know, maybe that's a bit unfair to him, but they are basically like, we just needed to use our Faustian technology more wisely, but that's really not possible. Like, the inherent in the idea of something being Faustian is that, like, it can't, you know, it's inherently, like, doomed and tragic and can't be used wisely.
Yes, it's like, you're going to go to hell in a bucket.
Technology to make robot. Yeah, you're going to go to hell in a bucket. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, moving on.
I actually, before we move on, I have a note, too, because I realized I made a mistake. I got a little too excited. And when I mentioned a little while back that Robert Masters was the cult leader in Oregon, that somebody I knew had like grown up on the compound of, it's actually a different Masters. I slightly misread that. The person I was referring to is Roy Masters. He has his own Wikipedia page, and you know, he was one of the pioneers of mindfulness meditation, and he everything I said about him was true. He had a compound in Oregon. He's actually been on like Hannity before, and like Larry King, Crossfire, The Drudge Report. Yeah, kind of a respectable guy, but not according to the personal story I heard. But actually, the author that was referenced on that the psychedelic thing was actually Robert E.L. Masters, somebody different. But then if you look at him, you can understand kind of why I thought that maybe they were the same person, because Robert E.L. Masters founded with his wife, Jean Houston, the Foundation for Mind Research in New York, conducting experiments in the borderline between mental and physical experience. He had a background in poetry and sexology, and was formerly director of the Visual Imagery Research Project in the Library of Sex Research. Both Houston and Masters have experimented with psychedelic drugs and hypnosis, and investigated induction of mystical experience in altered states of consciousness. So very much in the same milieu. But the last thing I'll say about the Robert E.L. Masters, who I think died in 2008, but also did move to Oregon. So he also ended up in Oregon. So that's kind of weird. I don't think they were related, because Roy Masters was British originally, and the Robert E.L. was from Missouri.
What is it about like British accents that like just set you up to like psyop like a bunch of
it's the true with, like, American curse? Yeah. But here's just a little
Achilles heel.
So he did write stuff about you know, altered states, psychedelics, all these other things in the 60s and 70s. But I noticed, because like there's a bunch of his books on Amazon, there's one from, I guess it was published in 2011, but it's called Eros and Evil, The Sexual Psychopathology of Witchcraft, and the two authors credited on it are Robert E.L. Masters and Aleister Crowley. And I guess, you know, the only thing it says about it, it's kind of an expensive book. It's $33 to $44. And the only note on it is, it says, containing the complete text of Sinistrized Demoniality. So this guy was into some Crowleyan sex magic.
What?
Do you know what that is? Do you know what that is?
Demoniality?
No, it was not Sinistri. It was Sinistri, like Sinistrai. Like, I guess that's a person. Sinistri. Like, I don't know who that is. Or Sinistrari. I guess it was a typo, because Sinistrari, because, you know, somebody wrote a very like Thelemite type review on it, and like some very in-depth kind of Aquino-esque reviews. An in-depth look at the sexual practices of witches, the devil-worshipping ones, not the modern-day fluffy bunny ones, with an emphasis on their relations with incubi, succubi, and the devil himself. This is an excellent historical perspective on the topic, although I'm sure a lot of it is colored by the superstitious beliefs of the inquisitors of the time. I especially like this book because it has given me many wonderful ideas for erotic blasphemy, a must-have for satanic perverts like myself.
Oh my god. Great. Oh my god.
That's one of the people that, you know, is referenced in Changing Images of Man. Cool.
Very cool. Wow.
Must have for satanic perverts. Like Joe Cummings in 2002 wrote that. Yeah.
Yes. Huh. Okay. Awesome.
Anyways.
Yeah. I guess Demonialitate, De Demonialitate et Incubis et Succubis is a book on incubi, succubi, and other demons. that had sex with people that was written by a Franciscan priest, Sinistrari, Ludovico Maria Sinistrari. So maybe they included that as like to get some ideas. I don't know, but yeah.
I don't know, yeah, but this guy, he was definitely no stranger to Crowleyan sex magic and specifically the devil worshipping kind of witches, not the modern day, not Stevie Nicks, though who can say?
Yeah.
But you know what I mean, like not just the likes crystals and real devil worshipping sex magic there. So pretty cool.
So yeah, just another All right.
That's a good.
On that,
good. On that note.
Yeah. On that note, I thought that this was a good, interesting discussion from this book. Again, like towards the end, we were talking about the strategies for making this happen. Well, I'm just going to start from this part of comparison of basic strategies because just the opening paragraph is really great. In the following analysis, we concentrate on strategies for the United States. They would be similar, but with important differences for other parts of the industrialized world, especially the nations with planned economies. Significantly different strategies would be appropriate for those third world nations with resources valued by the industrialized world, mainly fossil fuels and minerals. The situation is still more different for that residual fourth world of nations that have no resources other than poor land and poor people. Furthermore, we emphasize the roles of the powerful political and economic institutions of the technologically advanced world because it appears to be there that the main decisions will be made which will determine the smoothness or disruptiveness of the transformation. It is our purpose not to list specific tactics other than as exemplars, but rather to indicate guiding criteria for decisions and actions. All right. It will be useful to contrast 5 different basic strategies through which a desired transformation might be fostered. These are restorative, stimulative, manipulative, persuasive, and facilitative. The fundamental goal of a restorative strategy would be to restore the vitality and meaning of past images, symbols, institutions, and approaches to problems, which are believed to have worked successfully in some prior period and hence are judged to be appropriate in the present. Wallace, in a study of cultural revitalization movements, found that this strategy has peculiar appeal during the beginning stages of the revitalization cycle, when the extent of the crisis has not yet been recognized. In later stages, however, attempts to revert to earlier forms come to be seen as clearly inadequate. Hence, other strategies are then adopted. A stimulative strategy has as its fundamental goal the emergence of new images, approaches, or actions that are desired but that are premature. They do not fit the prevailing paradigm and hence would not be very likely to attract support from mainstream institutions in the society. The foci of stimulative strategies would tend to be actions that anticipate a new paradigm, but do not yet have much visibility or legitimacy. Such a strategy is especially appropriate when it is becoming clear that a crisis exists and the inadequacies of the old structures and concepts in a society or a science are being revealed. Wallace calls this cultural distortion, and Kuhn calls it a crisis involving a breakdown of the old paradigm. While a stimulative strategy seeks to alter the institution's values and behavior patterns of society in such a way as to honor or increase the freedom of choice of individuals in the society, a manipulative strategy attempts to accomplish a similar result through overtly or covertly reducing individual freedoms. Some manipulative tactics may be direct, as with the passage of a law. Others may be more indirect, as with editorial policies in the media or confrontation politics in the counterculture. This approach is more likely to be used by well-established interests that are challenged by newer ones. As we saw, however, it was effectively used in Germany to bring about dominance of a new image of man and of the fatherland, and it could be so used again.
Cool.
Amazing. Yeah, a persuasive or propagandistic strategy has as its goal persuading others of the rightness, utility, and attractiveness of a given image, conception, or way of acting. This strategy is an essential part of the political process, whether in the governmental activities of pluralistic democracies and totalitarian states alike, or in the deciding between competing scientific theories. A facilitative strategy seeks to foster the growth of new images and patterns that are visibly emerging. The main purpose of the support may be less to hasten or ensure the development than to help bring it about with a lowered likelihood of social disruption. If we examine these 5 approaches in the context of the 5 premises listed earlier, some seem appropriate and others much less so to the transformation under consideration, from the industrial era image to an emergent transcendental ecological one. The manipulative type of strategy, it's just like, for instance, is in such direct conflict with the self-realization ethic that it could not be used without risking severe distortion of the state it seeks to bring about. a risk I'm willing to take if I'm like just fucking Nelson Rockefeller, Pharaoh of Atlantis. But anyway, restorative strategies can play an important role in the present transformation because of the fact that the new emerging image is essentially that of the Freemasonry image. Freemasonry influence, which was of such importance in saving the nation's foundation. The activities of the heritage segment of the American Revolution bicentennial are mainly an attempt to recapture a waning American spirit, although they could serve to promote the new image by reminding us of the transcendental bases of the nation's founding, e.g. the all-seeing eye as the capstone of the pyramidal structure in the Great Seal. Like, calm down. I know you love it so much, but just, like, relax.
Really
just relax. They're just it's to just be so amazing if, like, you know, the emerging image is exactly the same one as the Freemasonry.
They're really incented. Really makes me wonder how many of these people are Freemasons, and also the influence of, like, okay, you know, we think about the families that go way, way, way back, right? Like, they go back before the American Revolution, that have been here since the very beginning, and presumably some of them must have been Freemasons, along with Washington and, I don't know, Madison and Ben Franklin, right? Both North and South. They were all some kind of Freemason, and there were groups like, you know, there were the Sons and Daughters of the American Revolution. There was the Order of, like, the Cincinnatus, which I think Cincinnati was actually named after the city because
of course,
you know, one of it, and that's like a
Cincinnatus figure.
That's literally like that's literally a patrilineal organization where you have to, like, trace your direct lineage back to one of, like, the 5,000 original signers who were all American Revolution veterans or something, and it's, like, still around today. So it makes me wonder, kind of, I know that spiritually speaking, you know, let's say a lot of, like, New England families started out as, you know, very religious Puritans in the 1700s. They all sent their sons to Yale to become preachers. But then by the 1800s, something changed, and the most elite of all of those, you know, sons of the original settlers started going and joining things like Skull and Bones and Scroll and Key and Book and Snake, and started getting involved in these more occulty kind of secret societies that were obsessed with kind of like death cult imagery, and were also about business networking primarily. They sort of lost their original, at least in terms of a Christian religious bent, they seem to have kind of lost it somewhere in the 19th century as industrialization really took off. And then we know that, like, Freemasons, I mean, we really have to do, like, a real extensive dive on, you know, Freemasons one day. But
I mean, Freemasonry and Christianity, like, I feel like, you know, Freemasons are still essentially Christian. They maybe don't emphasize Jesus as much as, like, I don't know, like, they might.
They're certainly deists. They're deistic.
Yeah, they're deists.
And in some lodges in America throughout history, I think probably the majority have had a requirement of, like, belief in a higher power, or, like, belief in God, so you can be an atheist. But then you always wonder about Freemasons, and it's like, is that just what you say on the outside? But actually, like, you just have some more Gnostic, esoteric kind of thing going on.
The all-seeing eye must be something, you know. Maybe it's the eye of providence, maybe it's Soclos, I don't know.
Well, I mean, I almost think about it. I think about it.
You know?
I think about it as a pyramidal class structure of, you know, basically that is the way in a sort of capitalist bourgeois society. Well, they're the glowing tip of it.
Because you can always, because you can always, you know, you can become God yourself, you know, you can achieve godhood, of course.
So these Freemasonic elites that are on the very top, they are both separate from the pyramid, like they're literally levitating, like they're using, like, psychokinetic powers, and they're glowing like a Lucifer Lightbringer tip of the spear, tip of the pyramid.
They love Lucifer,
and
like the Statue of Liberty, you know.
The light bringing, goddess Baphomet.
They love Prometheus. Yeah. Prometheus comes up in this too. The glorious Prometheus.
True. Wasn't the Statue of Liberty designed by a Freemason, like a French Freemason?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. And there's even something about the Italians. Didn't we read that recently about the Italian Masons who were brought over? Didn't Dave McGowan talk about that? That, like, maybe it was like Vito Pellicas's, like, relatives were
how, like, the Luciferian Libertas was, like, watching the scene.
Of 9/11. Exactly. Right, so I don't know. I just wonder, kind of, like, is there a continuity? Because they do mention here that, like, the activities of the, quote, heritage segment of the American Revolution bicentennial are mainly an attempt to, I don't know exactly what they refer to that, what they're referring to of the heritage segment. If that revolves
some kind of like celebration, like of the bicentennial.
That was a big deal. And, interestingly also, Hotel California came out the year of the bicentennial. We forgot to mention that, but that's kind of like a very big, it seemed like it was a big moment in the 70s where there was all this kind of like hullabaloo about like, yay, we're celebrating our 200th year. We're going to make it kind of a big year-long kind of celebration, but it was also like post-Watergate, like post-Vietnam, like their economic problems and everything. It did seem like America was at this like kind of crossroads. And so, they're saying that like, oh, well, this is an opportunity, of a restorative strategy we could employ. There was even, there was like a USIA commemorative video that I found because it was used, I might have shown it to you some years ago. It was used, somebody made like a fan video for R. Stevie Moore's There's No God in America, I think was what it was called. Mm-hmm. And basically somebody just overlaid this USIA, like very psychedelic, trippy, weird kind of cartoon that was like commissioned by the government for the bicentennial. Mm-hmm. I don't know what it was played alongside, but it was like basically. Remember, it was like it was just like endless streams of like hot dogs and like cars being like pumped out of tubes, and then like a floating all-seeing eye pyramid. Yeah, it was like really creepy.
Right,
yes.
No,
it's a good song too, very creepy song. But that was from the bicentennial celebration from USIA, which is totally like kind of in mesh with the CIA, and all kinds of stuff. So what were they up to? I don't know, but yeah, they're really focused. These people, the people that compiled this, are very obsessed with the potential of like reviving that old Freemasonic influence, which now you could see it revived or restored in a lot of different ways. But what you don't see, at least on the surface, I've read articles recently about how Freemasonic Lodge membership has like plummeted in the last generation, and it doesn't really seem to be the locus of kind of political
it's not cool
power
anymore. Like
networking
SLN
anymore.
Type stuff is more cool. Yeah, Freemasonry is a little bit outdated. Now you want unknownism. You want something.
Yeah, because it does seem like there's like a lower level of Freemasons, like your local people at these like lodges that don't seem particularly hyper power elites or particularly like special or powerful. But then it's like, oh, you find out that just like 50-60 years ago, it's like, oh yeah, Harry Truman, 33rd degree Scottish Rite Mason, and like all these other people like Brooks is Knights Templar Mason, and you go back to the turn of the century, and
the knowledge moves through like different things, like the power or the true wisdom, the light of the wisdom, the Promethean flame moves through different institutions, and they just leave the husk. Like, when Idris Shah's amazing great family was running, the quote-unquote secret society of the Sufis, then they had the great Gnostic flame of the glorious Lucifer. But then, it was passed on to, like, Gardnerian witchcraft, and then, like, whatever, and so, exactly. Like, they leave behind the institutional husk, but, like, the true wisdom is, like, with Timothy Leary or whatever, or Werner Erhard, or,
And you know what? Just to read a little more from this like strategy section, because this is where this is kind of where the sickos
stuff.
Are telling us. So they said that just jumping down a little bit. They talk about how once a societal transformation is underway, as this one appears to be, that social stability becomes a central problem. It is essential to have as accurate a picture as possible of the total state of affairs, so that research related to anticipating the nature and characteristics of the transformation rightly assumes high priority. So they say, other than in the passage of laws, manipulative strategies, insofar as the 5 initial premises hold up, would appear to be incompatible with the emerging image. No doubt existing consciousness changing, behavior shaping, subliminal persuasion, and other conditioning techniques could be used to accomplish some sort of transformation of sobering proportions, we ought to be able to be more effective than Nazi Germany. They say in parentheses, like, wait, what? Yeah. We ought to be able to be more effective than Nazi Germany. However, the use of manipulative techniques for this particular transformation conflicts fundamentally with the goals implicit in the transformation. Thus, they would probably, in the end, be disruptive and counterproductive. Persuasive techniques... Yeah, probably. But, maybe worth a shot. Maybe worth a shot.
Wouldn't be good, but, probably it would, possibly it would work. Okay, yeah, anyway.
The whole thing of, like, we ought to be able to be more effective than the Nazis is, like, doing a ton of work there.
That's so hilarious. Like, why would you even say that?
Yeah, don't encourage people who are reading this.
We would be better at it than they were. Like, what? Like,
it might come with some downsides that might be disruptive and counterproductive. Not wrong, not evil, but disruptive and counterproductive. So they say that, but then they immediately qualify that.
Then they immediately say, persuasive techniques that fall short of manipulation are unlikely to be very effective. Right. The reason is that one characteristic of such a transition period as we seem to be entering is low faith and disenchantment with, and cynicism regarding both scientific and political leadership. Well, so I find, they go on to say, which is an interesting part that we should read, but I just want to say, I question this whole structure. Like, this whole, of course, I don't think the Nazis thought that they were being manipulative. I don't think that they thought, I guess, there are all those things, tell a lie big enough or whatever, but I feel like they probably thought that they were being facilitative, for the most part.
Probably.
I feel like they mostly, maybe they did, a little bit. I feel like they thought that they weren't being, bad. They weren't doing, the bad thing or whatever. Whoever the Nazis were, this is what the Nazis did, whatever the example was for the Nazis of, a prototypically bad social movement. They probably didn't see themselves as doing the same thing as they were. I guess the Jews. They didn't see themselves as being manipulative the way that Jews were manipulative.
Yeah, no, they thought they were being honest or something like that, and
exactly,
or being facilitating.
Strong. Yeah, exactly. The whole idea, what we need to do is facilitate, not manipulate.
These all are kind of different shades of the same thing. They're more porous, I think, than these people are kind of letting on of. And they end up kind of saying that, we should really just mix all these together and use them, carefully, in tandem with one another to basically do it. Because each one has...
Faustian robot slaves wisely.
I feel like this really is why, we have Boston Dynamics robot dogs, running around. Is this paper has something to do with it, but they do endorse they say the most appropriate strategies, if the initial premises are accepted, would appear to be facilitative ones. The transformation has its own dynamic. It can probably not be slowed down or speeded up very much by political action once it has enough momentum to be visible. Even though, what if it is political action by nature? They're assuming that these forces are, not political. Okay, whatever. But the trauma of the transition, the amount of social disruption, economic weakening, and political confusion can probably be affected a great deal by the degree of understanding of what the transformation process is, why it is necessary, and what the inherent goals are. To use a biological metaphor, the woman beginning to experience labor pains and associated physiological changes is much more likely to approach birth with low anxiety and hence to avoid tensing up and doing the wrong things if she understands the nature of pregnancy and its inherent goal than if she had no idea of the process or where it leads. And this is another one that jumped out at me because, they did make these slight references of this also applies to planned economies as well. So they're, ostensibly talking about us, but I could see some parallels to maybe projecting outward to maybe some enemy countries, and so they said,
third world that has resources that would be of value to us.
So they go on here, say that perhaps another comparison is even more pertinent. We've earlier noted that societies in transformation bear a certain resemblance to individual behaviors accompanying a psychological crisis. The dislocation known as a psychotic break is sometimes brought on by the total unworkability of the person's life pattern and belief system, such that the whole structure seems to collapse and need rebuilding. Prior to the crisis, the person, to a disinterested observer, is seen to be engaging in all sorts of irrational behavior in his frantic attempts to keep from himself the awareness that his personal belief, value, and behavior system was on a collision course with reality. Under favorable circumstances, the individual goes through the crisis, uncomfortably to be sure, and restructures his life in a more constructive way. In an unfavorable environment, of course, the episode can escalate into a catastrophe. In the case of a society, a parallel condition to the psychotic break can occur, with a relatively sharp break in long-term trends and patterns. The analogs of irrational individual behavior may appear: social disruptions, violent crime, alienation symptoms, extremes of hedonism, appearance of bizarre religious cults, etc.
I love that. I love that because they're like, imagine. Well, no, it's just like, we don't want, all these, bad things to happen, like the appearance of bizarre religious cults, like for a good example of, like, what we need in society, like see every single bizarre religious cult ever, like, so I guess, it literally doesn't make sense, contradicts itself grossly, but they say bizarre religious cults like a normal mosque or like a normal church or synagogue, like, anyway, the worst thing ever might happen, like, it's like the ones that we're all involved, like, massively in promoting, that kind of thing. So he goes on to say, massive denial of realities may occur, e.g. with regard to exponential increases in population or energy use. The society may go to extreme measures to hide from itself the unworkability of the old order and the need for transformation. The transformation itself, like the psychotic break, may come almost ineluctably, and as with the individual, favorable and unfavorable outcomes are both possibilities. What we have termed facilitative strategies can be likened to the sort of care that may help bring about a favorable outcome. Okay, so that whole passage just reminded me of, like, what ended up happening to the Soviet Union kind of in the late 80s once, the kind of peace talks and glasnost and perestroika and, the Esalen Institute bringing Boris Yeltsin over here so he could do acid in a hot tub and, like, get visited by, like, a djinn who told him to believe in capitalism or something, whatever the fuck happened with that. It sounds like, basically the society, it sounds like a kind of projection of, like, the Soviet Union may go to extreme measures to hide from itself the unworkability of the old order and the need for transformation. And it may come almost ineluctably, like, just suddenly, like a shock where, like, oh, the Berlin Wall fell down and everybody's like, and... that's an interesting point. Like, but even at, like, a more, like, to telescope out from that, it's like a really deranged framework to say, like, oh, society is like our psychiatric patient. Like, especially since, like, earlier on in this book, they're like, oh, it's so interesting, like, Delgado's ideas about using electrodes and, like, biofeedback and, like, stuff like that, like, being
they dug
that,
into
like,
Delgado
their idea
a
of
bit.
Psychiatric care is, like, putting Paul Robeson in, like, a mental institution
insulin shock
and, like,
coma
a million times. Yeah, exactly. Like, okay, great. Like, no, thank you. Like, that's
like, you're right. That's a subtext of this whole thing. Like, is like, what if we could apply,
of, like, what psychiatric care is, like, just shooting everybody up with, like, psilocybin, like, or whatever, and, like, or, like, electrocuting them, or, like, like, it's not promising that they're like, oh, society is like our patient in a mental hospital. Like, no, please, like,
Yeah, and actually,
I also, like, don't trust them to, like, understand what, like, is crazy or not. I
don't.
To diagnose a psychotic break, like, I don't trust, like, people
of an entire
like,
country.
Exactly.
It's very weird. It's very creepy to look at, like, basically, our entire
I would not want any of these people to be my doctor in any way.
No.
Like, or, like, at all, like...
Never, ever.
Yeah, like, definitely, like, our society is, like, because basically, like, what they're saying without saying it is that, like, capitalism is headed towards crisis, which is true.
Yeah.
But, like, for them to set themselves up as, like, the doctor... like, of the psychotic break that is, like, their own system, like, collapsing, like, that's horrible. Like, no.
It's
like,
even ironic because since they endorse Scientology, that they sure are sounding like a bunch of arch cyclos, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. They're sounding like a bunch of arch cyclos, yeah. But you know what? It's actually interesting... now that I think about it, especially since you were talking about the Great Reset, and, like, a lot of the Great Reset conspiracy stuff has been, like, sort of around COVID and stuff, it is interesting that it's in all these medical terms, isn't it? It's interesting how it's like, oh, it's like society has a sudden disease, and we need to just treat it, I guess it's more of a a pregnancy or a psychiatric disease, but...
It's a little bit, but I mean,
it's a medical emergency.
It's a medical emergency, so they've already set the frame now that like anything can kind of go just about with a medical emergency of a big enough scale, and that's like why you're going to see the climate change stuff, which was just getting started around the same time this was published, is going to be cast in kind of medical pandemic type terms. Like, climate change is a new pandemic.
Well,
so we have to.
They aren't unrelated. I mean, it's true that the globe is changing. The world is changing. Like, things are. Transforming as a result of like all of these factors.
Well,
and this gonna be just over. Perhaps I'm being too cynical and not optimistic enough. I think that I hear that a bunch of people are buying some. I hear people are more into astrology now. Some people are buying some occult books. The membership in the Satanic Temple and their ironic abortion protest is up. So I think actually that we're all gonna be fine.
The kids are all right. Okay. Yeah, I did notice
the
here.
Kids are all right. Yeah.
Right after this section, again, I'm going to have to take back what I said earlier again, where I said, they didn't at all address the idea of how, capitalism creates all this economic productivity and efficiency and stuff, and then it ends up counteracting human ends in a very weird way. And they actually do address this, but the way they do it is such a, like, gymnastics flip of a thing that also sounds like this was totally codified in the like Silicon Valley corporate culture at a certain point of like, how do you confront the kind of the crises and contradictions?
Capitalism?
No, they don't. They don't use the word capitalism. No, they don't.
I think it's humanistic capitalism, which is like
yes, I know. No, they don't say capitalism, but clearly that's what they're talking about. But of course, they're like kind of trying to hide what
thing. Yeah,
they're doing this tightrope walk, and so they call this
industrial complex society. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, they call this the fundamental anomaly is what they call it. So they say that the central feature of the hypothesized transformation is that its ineluctability comes about, as indicated in Chapter 3, because of a major and growing discrepancy between the cultural and social products of industrialization on the one hand, and generally desirable human ends on the other. A fundamental anomaly exists of the following sort. So they list a few things. 1. The basic system goals that have dominated the industrial era, material progress, private ownership of capital, maximum return on capital investment, freedom of enterprise, etc., and that have been approached through a set of intermediate goals that include efficiency, economic productivity, continued growth of technological manipulative power, and continued growth of production and consumption, have resulted in processes and states, e.g., extreme division of labor and specialization, compulsive replacement of men by machines, stimulated consumption, planned obsolescence, exploitation of common resources, environmental degradation, worsening world poverty, which culminate in a counteracting of human ends, e.g., enriching work roles, self-determination, conservation, wholesome environment, humanitarian concerns, world stability. Put another way, the fundamental anomaly is that, quote, good micro decisions, i.e. local decisions made in accordance with prevailing rules and customs, currently do not add up to socially good macro decisions. So interesting how it doesn't. And of course, they say individuals, they're doubling down on this. Individuals, corporations, government agencies, in the course of their activities, make micro decisions, like to buy a certain product, to employ a person for a particular task, to develop and market a new technology, to enact a minimum wage law, that's a weird thing to throw in, that are guided by a web of cultural and habitual behavior patterns, common values, and beliefs. These micro decisions interact to constitute a set of macro decisions of the overall society, like a 4% annual growth rate in energy usage, degradation of the environment, depletion of non-renewable resources, which, if Adam Smith's invisible hand were working properly, would be compatible with the cultural aims and objectives of the society. The degree of compatibility has for some time been visibly deteriorating. The response to this fundamental anomaly is a massive and intensifying challenge from consumers, environmentalists, minorities, workers, civil libertarians, youth, and others to be the legitimacy of basic system goals and institutions. If economic and business goals do not appear to be congruent with social goals, if, quote, good business decisions lead to, quote, bad social decisions, this suggests the need for fundamental changes in dominant institutions and social paradigms to bring the functioning of the society into harmonious relationship with the dominant cultural image of human life. To this end, some have proposed one and another form of, quote, new socialism to increase the governmental regulatory responsibilities over the micro decision-making of the citizenry and private sector institutions. It is important to note in this connection that the fundamental anomaly described above is essentially a characteristic of technological and industrial success, not of a particular form of government. Thus, although its form is somewhat different, a similar sort of fundamental dilemma is found in industrially advanced collectivist nations with centralized social planning, which by that they mean socialist, communist countries.
Of course. Yeah.
Weird kind of thing to say of like, yeah, I don't know. Like, there's some such shit going on there, I feel like, with, I mean, first of all, saying, like,
of course,
oops,
you know,
like,
it's like saying, like, oh, like, no, don't, well, yeah, this basically is saying, like, don't suggest that capitalism is bad, like, please, you know, like, really, like, a lot of the problem is, like, that, you know, of course, this is a cliche, but, like, the full defeat of capitalism, like, wasn't accomplished, like, by those, like, that really was, like, the problem, more so than that they, like, you know, it's in...
Yeah.
Also, like, what is technological and industrial success? Like, you just said that obviously, like, this is a form of failure, really, but...
You're
anyway,
kind of
like,
complimenting the communist countries for being industrially successful, but, you know, but they're also kind of, they're divorcing it from the ideological content and character of those governments and kind of saying it doesn't really matter because they just embraced, like, the great logic of Fordism and succeeded because it's just this powerful system of, you know, economic order that just pumps out wealth. It makes the money printer go brr, you know, and therefore it's not really relevant that they're Marxist or anything like that. And, you know, I think even saying like the new socialism, it sounds like some kind of weird AOC shit of increasing governmental regulatory responsibilities over micro decision making. That's not really socialism.
Exactly. Yeah, but they can't. But also they can't like deal with that even. They're like, everything's like really like it's amazing because like they're somehow like absolving themselves or, you know, this whole thing of like responsibility. Like at the same time they're indicting it. They're just like, well, you know, we had to become technologically successful, but they're just this weird anomaly where like this has destroyed the world.
Money,
you know,
it destroyed the world, and all the money went to like 0.1% of everybody. It's just so interesting. Like fundamental anomaly.
Exactly. Like,
oops,
wow,
you know. Also,
that everyone,
if you're gonna say
everyone like hates this and they're gonna overthrow the system, like, you know, or like whatever, you know, if we're not careful.
Yeah, right.
You know,
like how do we get into their heads?
What a fundamental anomaly that just by being so technologically successful and being like genocidal maniacs, like,
the haters come out. I guess.
Yeah, the haters come out. Why don't they love the all-seeing eye? Why don't they love the all-seeing eye? Like,
right. Also, if you're gonna throw in at the end that this whole outlining of the problems of the fundamental anomaly in industrial, basically they are talking about capitalism, you know, as actually it's very like almost Trotskyist, like they're just state capitalists, you know, and saying that like there's not really any difference, there's no like alternative character to like the Soviet bloc, they're just like, or, you know, it's almost like a Ted Kaczynski kind of thing, or like, well, they're doing industrialism, so they too are a disaster for the human race, you know. It's kind of like just writing off all technology, but they're clearly not trying to write off all technology. They want to like keep using it. They don't want to they're not Luddites, you know, or Anprims. But, you know, to say as the first point of the fundamental anomaly, the basic system goals that dominated the industrial era, okay, material progress, yes. I think that's universal to any industrial society, yes. But private ownership of capital, maximum return on capital investment, freedom of enterprise, well, okay, there's an entire industrial superpower that by definition does not have private ownership of capital. I guess they, in a way, they do try to maximize the return on kind of their capital investment to make the economy as efficient as possible, but also freedom of enterprise, also no. So then how is it just exactly the same? And like thus, it's just such a dodge of like, we're not even going to get into this thorny territory of trying to like compare kind of like a Marxist approach to industrialism, or even attack it
and
on
also,
grounds
like,
that maybe would be fair, they won't even do it.
Well, it's interesting because when they're saying the fundamental anomaly described above is essentially a characteristic of technological and industrial success. So, but I would say almost that, like, capitalism, historically speaking, is a fundamental aspect of the way that, like, the whole narrative of technological progress and industrial progress has unfolded. Like, I think that the idea
I could agree
capitalism,
with that.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly would agree would say myself, that, like, the theory of capitalism, like Marx's critique of capitalism, that's a critique of capitalism under, like, an industrial society, and is part and parcel of, like, an analysis of an industrial society, like, there's maybe approaches to changing things or whatever, but, like, the refusal to, like, engage with that is absurd. I do think that, but I think that, like, it's still this kind of weird thing where they have to, like, preserve, like, the greatness of, it's the same thing of, like, the Nazarene scum Magians from Western Europe, like, they created a separation between humanity and nature, unlike the amazing Masonic deists like Thomas Jefferson, who was, like, raping a slave over here, in America, where they were good. It's, like, stupid, it's all, it is all dodge. It's all about making themselves and, like, the readers feel good about themselves, like, it's all, like, very ideologically laden, and
exactly. It even hits on
product.
It is. It's quite pathetic. It even kind of validates some of the points that Carl Oglesby was making in the Yankee and Cowboy War about the obsession with, like, the reliance upon the frontier and the obsession with it and the anxiety produced by kind of the ruling bourgeoisie as, like, we got to find a new one. So they talked about, they talk at the end here about, how to resolve the fundamental anomaly. And it's very chilling, and it is kind of prophetic in a not cool way, that they said there, first off, there's going to have to be some satisfactory coming to terms with what they call the new scarcity. Scarcity of food, potable water, construction materials, etc., has always been an aspect of the condition of human life. It has in the past rather successfully been considered as remediable by advancing frontiers and adequate technology. In some sense, it has thus been all but eliminated in the advanced nations. The new scarcity, though, is of a different sort. It arises from approaching the finite planetary limits, I guess natural storehouses of fossil fuels and strategic materials, the ability of the natural environment to absorb the waste products of industrial society, fresh water, arable land, habitable surface area, and the ability of natural ecological systems to absorb interventions without risking ecological catastrophes that threaten human life. So this is the beginning of, like, the era of limits,
Yeah, but it's so interesting that the, like, global warming isn't even on the radar. Like, the idea of warming or climate change, they kind of like allude to it, but, like, the idea of, like, greenhouse gases, etc., like, the change in the average temperature per year, which is, like, really the dominant thing. Like, it's very interesting how, like, none of that is on the radar.
Well, I think I'm not sure.
We're gonna run out of fossil fuels.
Yeah, like, I'm not sure about
which is, like.
Yeah, I would have to go back and check about, like, the science of, like, climate change and that whole movement. I think it started getting its first stirrings in the 1970s, but in the 1970s it was, like, the kind of, it was a whole grab bag of concerns, like, that were kind of related.
Energy crisis,
energy crisis, the OPEC thing, which might have been, like, a backroom deal with, like, Kissinger anyways, to, like, to set up the petrodollar or some shit. But, I think that, we're still dealing with a lot of these things today of kind of, like, habitable, even climate change itself is probably going to affect a lot of these things, like basically, the choice to use fossil fuels, the basically absorbing all the plastic and waste products of our, industrial output, fresh water access, Nestle's buying all the water rights around the world, arable land, that's going to be affected, habitable surface area, there'll be climate refugees and things like that. Now, of course, like we talked previously about how some of the alarmism actually doesn't help, like the Chomsky traffics in, it doesn't actually help people wrap their heads around it. We're not, it's not going to be like instant extinction, and maybe it's like a weird transference of the nuclear war fears getting like transmuted onto climate change, because that really was a threat where a large amount of humanity could be extinguished within like months, like a catastrophic nuclear war.
Or you could say that it's a transference of like the idea that our our image of man needs to die. That like what has to become extinct is like the paradigm of society, and like that
agenda.
Perhaps yes, maybe. Like it is true that like our society, not only for like the actual very legitimate like ecological reasons, which I do maintain like one of the biggest indictments of capitalism and like the respect in which the Industrial Revolution has been a disaster for the human race, and like the general like the rise of genocide like since that time, etc. Our society, it needs to change just like fundamentally, because even if that weren't a factor, like there's many awful aspects of it. So it's not just a matter of like existential necessity, like it's also
these people are getting it, like you see it here in the 70s, they're getting out ahead of things that they see coming down the pike soon, so they'll be ready for it, to just like Event 201 or something like that, like, oh, we got to practice and theorize and strategize and all this stuff. There's a kind of a chilling paragraph again in this section I just want to read real quick that is still talking about the new scarcity. It says, on the one hand, to deal with the problems of the new scarcity, with the cultural as distinguished from the economic goal of full employment, and with the growing powers of technology to change any and all aspects of the total environment, physical, social, political, psychological, there is a demonstrated need for some form of effective societal planning and control. On the other hand, there are well-founded fears of the consequences of opting for more government control, especially from this crowd. It remains to be shown that a democratic society can deal with the new scarcity, provide sufficient and suitable social roles, anticipate and guide technological impacts, and protect the interests of the overall society, and yet preserve the basic characteristics of a free enterprise system. Well, there you go right there. That's the closest they get to like admitting the truth. That base, and so the implication in that's
very similar to like point 6 of like we need necessary social controls for that. Exactly.
Maybe we need to maybe it might not be true that a democratic society can deal with this, so we might just have to get rid of it. If we have to choose between having a democratic society and keeping a free enterprise system, I think the implicit thing in this entire report, there's no question of what choice is going to be made. We're sticking with free enterprise.
Also, another important thing is that we need to convince everyone that like we need just like a temporary state of exception. Like they said, I read this quote earlier, the more there can be general understanding of, they say regulation and restraint of behavior will be necessary in order to hold the society together while it goes round a difficult corner. The more there can be general understanding of the transitory but inescapable nature of this need, the higher will be the likelihood that a more permanent authoritarian regime can be avoided. So we need to like psyop everyone into knowing that like we need to like take away, their like institute an authoritarian regime to avoid an authoritarian regime. Yeah,
doesn't that just remind you of a few things like
to have one?
Like, oh my God, mass shooters. Oh my God, lone wolf ISIS attack. Oh my God, COVID, gotta lock down. Can't go outside or hug anybody for a year until, like, the CDC tells you can take your mask off or something, even if you're vaccinated. Like, we're really going into it now, Like, we're really heading into the mouth of the beast. And
we're rounding a difficult corner, but we all
that's what made me think of the when he said, like, we need something to help, humanity round a difficult, and I thought about, like, the dexterity of the Boston Dynamics robot dog, like being able to like deftly like circle around a corners to like tase somebody or something, like shoot tear gas canisters at protesters. It's like we need a robot dog to navigate this difficult corner in our civilization's progress, to hunt down dissidents and climb stairs and stuff. So it's pretty chilling, and it's like that's as close to as an admission as I think we're gonna get out of this book. Is that they, it's like they don't even question, should we preserve the basic characteristics of a free enterprise system? They just kind of throw it out there, it almost seems like knowing their audience, of like, you know, corporate bigwigs or whatever that are going to read this and go, like, wait, we might not be able to preserve the basic characteristics of a free enterprise system. Well, then, all right, what else you got, doctor? You know, like, what can we do? Oh, okay, psyop everybody? Good, let's do it. You know, exactly. Use some mythopoetic bullshit to manipulate everybody.
Of Atlantis? Yeah, right.
Yeah. They did say one more time. Maybe we'll move on in a second to that last article, but I noticed there's one more. The last thing they say about kind of this like necessary transformation, they said, as Galbraith and others have noted, when the 1,000 largest, mainly multinational corporations in the world attain such size and power that their incomes are larger than the majority of nation-state incomes, their role in contributing to societal macro decisions is significantly altered. No longer are they simply subject to market forces. In an important sense, they exert control over the market. No longer are they simply subject to the controls imposed by national governments. In an important sense, they exert control over national governments. Thus, there arises a demand that the largest corporations assume a social responsibility toward all those, a worldwide group, whose lives they affect. One way in which this might come about is represented in arguments for a, quote, new socialism in which important industries might be nationalized, like an energy supply, and business would be subjected to more control by government to ensure that society's macro decisions would be strongly influenced by elected representatives of the people affected. An alternative response might be termed new privatism by contrast. This response would involve recognition that legitimacy is conferred or withdrawn in various ways besides elected representation, and it would entail modifications to the operative goals of corporations such that they include, on a par with earned return to stockholders, the two additional roles of providing opportunities for meaningful work as output in addition to goods and services, and providing tangible benefits to society. Stockholders, after all, represent only one group who have an investment in the corporations. Employees invest some portion of their lives, no shit, and society invests its trust towards the shaping of the future. So I think that's right there. Okay, yeah, we're there now. That basically, this is like shit, like stakeholder capitalism, you know, like Apple has a green conscience, blah, 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 all that shit. And so they're kind of offering it as, well, here's two options. We could do a kind of a social democratic new socialism where we nationalize the commanding heights of certain industries that are very critically important, and then maybe, you know, increase government regulation, kind of like maybe a New Deal. Maybe a Green New Deal, or we could hyper privatize everything and come up with a bunch of like sentimental bullshit that makes you feel like you have a role in the company that is shaping your future.
Maybe there can be some kind of synthesis where we have like a national socialism. They
just have to prove that they're doing it for the fatherland.
One of the terms they throw around in this a lot, which is like just a horrifying term, is satisfice. Which is like, you know, the idea of, like sacrificing yourself for the well-being of everyone, you know, well-being of quote-unquote the society, aka like, you know, the Institute of Noetic Sciences. But, you know, and the whatever.
Well, no, it's not. I don't think it's sacrifice. I think it's satisfice so that it's like a satisfaction.
Well, exactly.
Is exactly
you have to sacrifice yourself. Yeah, you have to sacrifice yourself, but you have to be satisfied, you know, by the
well, it's like people are satisfied by making kind of the best possible, like, sufficient decision. So it's like they actually are satisfied by things that simply suffice. I don't know. Does that sound like we're all going to be eating bugs in the pods soon, and it's going to be satisficing?
Right. Like satisfaction is not usually possible. So, you know, we suffice the best we can, arriving at decisions that do not possibly satisfy, but may indeed satisfice. Nice word.
That feels like the entire internet now is designed to satisfice. I actually originally read this as having to do with, I see how it's suffice, not sacrifice. I thought it had to be sacrifice. Amazing. No.
Okay,
well, it is kind of like you are sacrificing in a way.
That's what it suggests to me. Well, yeah, because I was thinking about, like, the whole idea of, you know, like, the liberal state as being the one that, like, requires, like, all of its citizenry to sacrifice themselves at any given time. I think it's a Schmittian idea, like the autonomy of the political. I think that he came up with that, or at least one of his critics, but the name escapes me right now. But yeah, I thought of that, like the term satisfice is like, so, yeah.
It's a weird one, but they like it.
Yeah.
But it's kind of a thing of like, maybe stop reaching. You're not actually ever going to get what you want anyways. So actually, most people just like make do with what the best possible thing that they can kind of have, and that in some ways maybe is preferable to, I don't know. It's a whole jumble of ideas, but I think they want us to be satisfied. I think that's what I feel like, being on the internet and like living your life online is like satisficing. It's like not exactly satisfying the way real human relations are, and they're happy that way because it keeps you more addicted to it because it's just sufficing. It's like a maintenance high, That's what it connotes to me, at least. But anyways, do you want to read? You dug up something. We'll start to wrap up. You dug up a paper by O.W. Markley from 1998, right?
Yeah, I do want to read that. Well, I just wanted to note that what I was thinking of was Paul Kahn's. Yeah, it does deal a lot with Schmidt, but it's his book Putting Liberalism in Its Place, which deals with this idea. It argues that political order is founded not on contract but on sacrifice. Because liberalism is blind to sacrifice, it is unable to explain how the modern state has brought us to both the rule of law and the edge of nuclear annihilation. That's just from the blurb for it on Princeton University Press. Good book. But anyway, that's what satisfice reminded me of. But anyway, I found another article by O.W. Markley called Visionary Futures, which had like an amazing passage where he cites I guess he cites a lot in the Changing Images of Man. They cite a lot of like weird stuff, but this did jump out at me as something odd to cite, and just a very odd passage in general with some great stuff. So he's talking about how to experience alternative futures, and this is one of the methods for that. It's a virtual time travel procedure for assessment of strategies. So he writes, this process is based on a body of theory that, although highly relevant to the philosophy and practice of alternative futures research, is beyond the pale of what most futures researchers are willing to embrace because of its source. Channeled material in the book Seth Speaks by Jane Roberts. So, we'll probably talk more about that book extensively, but, one of the most famous channeled things, so like an entity named Seth, maybe a certain donkey-headed being, but maybe just some sus thing named Seth, I don't know. Anyway, so although rather more complex than the simplistic summary given here, this process involves conceptually nothing more than first choosing two or more alternative policy options regarding some problem or opportunity of concern, e.g. the problem-oriented output from Method 1 and some other stuff, and then holding the intention in consciousness, as in a simulation exercise, to implement one option rather than the other while in a guided imagery process, not unlike the virtual time travel procedure described above in the essay. Experientially, to observe the short and long-range impacts of choosing this particular policy option. One then imagines zeroing out the simulated intention to pursue the first option, and instead to hold the imagined intention to implement the second policy option, then experientially traveling through the future that stems from it, and so forth. The results are usually very clear-cut. Which specific future feels more desirable and why? Thus, this is a most practical tool for strategically assessing various policy options of concern, whether they be personal or planetary in scope. To continue our hypothetical behavioral scientist example, Method 3 might be based on two policy options. A, making the personal/professional choice of doing nothing further about futures research on one hand, or B, on the other hand, taking the plunge and beginning to use more futures-oriented concepts and tools in one's professional work in order to make it more personally satisfying, or satisficing, and useful to society. As to what the results might look like, consider the case of a clinical psychology student who protested that a left brain rational/analytic final exam was not appropriate in the author's graduate course on visionary futures. The author, in turn, challenged the student to use Method 3 to let the results speak for themselves in making the choice whether to require the final exam. The results? In the version of the script used, the participant was to choose a vehicle through which to travel to the future. Our student, always wanting to experience being a pilot, chose a T-33 jet trainer. In the alternative future involving no final exam, the jet had a real hard time taking off the runway and was relatively unstable in flight and seemed always on the edge of lapsing into uncontrolled flight conditions. In the alternative future in which there was a final exam, the jet took off the ground by the student's parents. The jet took off the ground strongly and was doing aerial acrobatics, which were seen and admired from the ground by the student's parents, family, and friends. Needless to say, the experience quickened the student's willingness to take the rational/analytic final exam, which the instructor from the beginning had recommended as a way to better integrate the cognitive concepts of the course with the behavioral skills that had by that time been well learned. Just imagine... Well, this is like a weird situation anyway, but like this guy's student came to him and was like, I don't want to take the final exam. And he was like, well, you have to imagine that you're in a plane to the future, 2 possible futures, and he's like, okay. And then in one of them, he saw himself like crashing the plane. And the other one, his parents were like, yay, like while he was doing like flips and stuff. And he was like, I'll take the final exam. All right, whatever. But anyway, so
hypnosis.
Another example that he gives is, it is important to note that when appropriately facilitated, this method works quite well in business as well as academic settings, and with newbies as well as those more experienced with guided cognitive imagery methods for strategic visioning. For example, the author recently led a team from a Fortune 50 corporation, currently investigating planetary marketing strategies, using this approach to investigate the long-range implications of Western corporate strategies to embrace marketing to third world nations versus third world isolationist strategies for corporate America.
Wow.
The results were, in the words of a corporate team leader, breathtakingly clear that the more inclusive policy option for American corporations to seek third world markets rather than avoid them is better for corporations as well as being better for the third world. After all, we do live in the same planetary spaceship, and this is a quote from the corporate team leader. We do live in the same planetary spaceship, and increasingly, what ruins a whole region threatens to ruin the whole world. I'm sure
what would ruin the region, like not having access to Coca-Cola or something?
Exactly.
Like not having McDonald's?
Not marketing to them would ruin it.
Cool.
But
cool.
Yeah, so it's amazing to think that a Fortune 50 corporation went to a retreat with O.W. Markley. They sat down, imagined themselves in a T-33 jet trainer, saw themselves flying crisply while being applauded by whatever, and they're all their family and friends, and they're like, well, it's breathtakingly clear that we have to market to the third world. And then this guy being like, wow, this Seth speaks bullshit really works.
Yeah, I wonder to what extent.
Already, well,
it's like we mentioned earlier
hypnotized them.
Yeah, he probably did kind of hypnotize them. He got them in an encounter therapy set and setting where he could do that, and they were suggestible.
Set and setting.
I mean, it makes me think about what we said kind of near the beginning about how, even though maybe not a ton of people have heard of changing images of man, that a kind of relatively small thing, like they said, what do they call it? A high leverage idea can have an outsized impact on a certain slice of a population that makes it much more popular.
Very outside.
And so it makes me wonder, because I think this is written kind of towards a corporate kind of business audience, that a lot of these things, it's easy to think about it as they're going to do this to the entire population and psyop all of us into, loving yoga and not questioning capitalism. But I think if there's a group that they want to target the hardest, it might be kind of like C-suite business executives and stuff like that, who need to be brought in on the ideological program and given a reason. Sometimes a weird thing we visualized that it would be so bad for the third world if we didn't market Coca-Cola to them. So we have to do it because that means we're doing the right thing, instead of just sitting down. We talked about it before, to what extent do capitalist elites or some people sit around or even what you said about the Nazis and sit around and rub their hands together and are I mean, I think maybe people like Michael Aquino do, because they're very consciously down with that. But a lot of these people, I mean, even the reports from one of the reasons they had to bring up the Einsatzgruppen in World War II when they were going around slaughtering people in Eastern Europe is that they originally started using the Wehrmacht soldiers, regular soldiers, and they didn't handle it well. I mean, not to excuse them for doing genocide, but they would purposely miss when they had to execute people by firing squad, or they would they'd have psychological breakdowns and stuff, because the image of man that had been sold to them was of this badass, heroic German hero, this Übermensch that was actually, and like it goes to your point actually, that they were all psyoped into thinking they were on the right side of history, but there's just something about mass executing civilians that just doesn't jive with that. So what they did is then they're like, oh shit, okay, so when every time we go in a region, like we invade Ukraine, we got to round up all the most right-wing, like ultra-nationalistic, pissed off Ukrainians and then get them to go kill all the Poles and the Jews. And then that ended up working because it was like local beefs where, you know, the context of a Ukrainian wanting to do a pogrom on a Jewish, you know, shtetl or kill his Polish neighbors is basically that, you know, it's a more localized beef where I'm the good guy because Poland took over this country after World War I and they treat us like shit. So I'm going to get even and get my land back, you know, that kind of thing. So, you know, they did a Romania, Hungary, all around. And so you can kind of see the power of like not. And so if you think a system like corporate American capitalism, multinational corporations, like absolutely a lot of these people are like fucking bugmen with no souls. Or they're like, there's probably an overrepresentation of sociopaths in these positions. But I don't think everybody is like a conscious sociopath. I think they've had to come up with ways to contextualize and spin whatever they're doing. And even at a point to like go on these spiritual retreats. Maybe that's probably a big part of the reason maybe why they do it. It's not just to build kind of a tribal harmony in the organization, but it's also to contextualize and justify their rampaging of like global markets and resources without end, which is probably going to end in like a huge, if not an immediate apocalypse, but like a cataclysmic era where we're going to like reap what we sow. But in the meantime, they have to convince themselves that they're good people. So that's what these susslords at Stanford seems like they were there to provide, that meta narrative and that image of man where they could sleep well at night, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think they even mentioned that in Changing Images of Man, like in one of the appendices, where they talk about like the Sierra Club and stuff, and you know, like corporate retreats, and they talk about like the ritual activities, you know, of you know, these groups that create an ideological bond. It's still, again, going back to like the Maoism example of like how do you build in this case, like how do you build counter-revolutionary consciousness, but not in a way like you're not going to invite the local head of the John Birch Society to come and give you a ranting speech about how like communism is evil and it's everywhere and we need to stomp it out because these liberal Californians, man, who've been dabbling in all these groovy ideas, that doesn't sound cool to them, you know? That's part of the old Nazarene outdated tech, man, you know, so they want something new and inspirational. It's really true. They needed a revitalized image of self to basically, I guess, not have a kind of a kind of psychotic breakdown or have this like cognitive dissonance that would weaken the overall organism of like capitalism, the, you know, satanic demiurge itself. So, you know, they had to do this to like manipulate people into actually we're reaching beyond the paradigm. So then you can write a book where you don't have to bring up Vietnam. You don't have to bring up any of the other awful things, or that we were still in like an official apartheid society up until the late 60s or anything like that. You know what I mean? Like it's just no, we just need to raise our consciousness and like these things will kind of work themselves. But in the meantime, bare knuckle, all out, like global techno-capitalism is going to keep going, and we're not actually stopping it. We're just, you know, like they said, don't throw the privatized baby out with the bathwater now. We don't want to get rid of the free enterprise system, right? You know, we just want to rejuvenate the image of it, basically. And then maybe become Nazis if we have to, right? Yeah. No, that actually is a very interesting, I'm just reading this very interesting appendix here now, talking about, you know, like the managerial elites and how, you know, they will create these different network systems, like, you know, it's so ridiculous, like, you know, the linking function of the revival meeting, the demonstration, the rally, and the ritual activities of the grassroots spins, which is like a synchronous polycephalic network or something, that's what it's short for, you know, like the Sierra Club, is paralleled in the global managerial network by a variety of overlapping social clubs and policy organizations, just like the Freemasons. that not only in exclusive playgrounds among the California redwoods, but in policy-making groups of the Business Council, the Council of Foreign Relations. Wow, cool.
Yeah, they are connected.
Yeah, so,
we might have to do a sus Sierra Club episode one day, and like maybe a sus John Muir. He was a big figure growing up. You know, Muir Woods, Endor, where they shot Return of the Jedi. You know, I wonder if he was a Freemason, because he gets such a the father of the national parks and all this like fun stuff and all these things.
And as we know, the Council on Foreign Relations is just another great thing that's helping us, because this actually is interesting. The point here that this author writes, the point is to recognize the power of a few basic assumptions to unify organizationally disparate groups. It is the key to recognizing this qualitatively different mode of organization, one so alien to the bureaucratically minded that it appears to be either non-existent or is interpreted as a conspiracy. Many observers of the protest movements during the 60s fell into both traps. The first trap is now catching people who press for legislation requiring dismantling of large corporations, or tighter control over multinationals by nation-states. This is to misunderstand the organizational structure binding the upper levels of the corporate giants and the nation-states into a network of shared and conflicting interests. The conspiracy trap catches many, particularly in discussions of the oil crisis. As Goodwin points out, there is no need for conspiracy. It is only necessary that managers, corporate or governmental, understand and follow the rules of behavior dictated by the structure that binds them, and the set of stable assumptions, often unspoken, that inform decision-making. Decisions made by people who share assumptions, even though there's been no discussion between them, will produce actions so similar that there appears to be collusion, even though the actors themselves feel they occupy conflicting positions.
Okay, I get it, but also shut the fuck up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Shut the fuck up. It's just all like broad structural forces and people act in the roles that they have been programmed. Again, it's like a weird thing of like, oh, they're kind of just like playing their role in society like cogs in a machine, and thus like don't have agency, but also we're obsessed with like individual autonomy and like individual destiny. I don't know. It's so lame that
like,
it's
also
like
the idea that like they're connected, like, that this is like a network interchange and not like a formal, it's an adhocracy, horizontal linkages. I mean, I guess, it's similar to like an interlock type thing, but like the idea that this is like a good new paradigm or something, I don't know if that's really what she's saying, like, is good in terms of like these. I mean, I think that she's saying it's better than the hierarchy. So, but
it's really better than hierarchy. It's better than centrally planned this or that. It's just everybody at least gets to be free and follow their own star and live their truth. And I guess, but also be like a monkey, like a robot monkey, like who's just acting their role in a machine. And it's such a dumb.
What CPU?
It's such a dumb like take on like high political matters of like political intrigue. Like you can read going back to antiquity, like political intrigue is a thing. Did like Caesar know that all the senators are going to get up and stab him? No, because they had a conspiracy that, again, it didn't have over 50 senators, so it doesn't, it was possible.
I also like the idea that like there's two traps that people fall into. Like one is wanting these multinational corporations to be like more regulated, and the other one is like thinking that there's a conspiracy, like which
the 60s trap they fell into, like when Robert Kennedy and
so many traps. Yeah, he fell into a trap, all right.
He did fall into a trap.
Yeah, JFK fell into a trap.
As Graham Parsons said in the great song Sin City, he trusted his crowd, so he spoke right out loud, and they lost the best friend they had. Yeah. They got him, folks. It's a pretty interesting but ultimately contemptible bullshit book that is evil.
That's my sort of curiosity, but like what to expect going into it. Yeah,
it's frustrating that this was so obviously so influential to so many people, and that people don't really know about it.
Yeah, it's quite infuriating to like picture these like smug people like writing it and thinking that like they understand anything. Like
they know. It's pretty bullshit. But they did they did the ultimate central planning, and I guess they won. Or decentralized planning. They were planning, folks. They were planning. They're planning something, and I think they accomplished part of it, but and now this is all like endemic in our society.
The thing they're most passionate about, it's funny, like facing the crisis of capitalism, the thing they're most passionate about is like getting everyone to worship the all-seeing eye. Like they just, like that's...
There's just not enough Freemasonry.
The back of the dollar bill. Yeah. Of all things, like the U.S. dollar will point the way out of the problem that we're in. What's on the back of the U.S.
That's kind of amazing. That's amazing. That is kind of it in a nutshell. Just stare into the glowing Luciferian eye of the U.S. dollar bill that is backed by like Saudi oil, which isn't a conspiracy. Don't think about it too hard. Just like stare into your navel and do mindfulness meditation and join one of these great cults that we've told you about today. It'll all be good, man. So watch out for fucking social scientists that suck. Any thoughts you want to leave us with about this great thing?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah, watch out for Gnostic cultists who love being Freemasons, shooting psilocybin into their heads and being cyclos and,
giving Stuart Brand his first
having
acid.
Electrodes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and auditing themselves and thinking that they accessed, the true perennial wisdom. Yeah.
Stay away from it. If you don't know by now, stay away from it. Yeah. But we'll jump into some of the people who were quoted in this. Yeah,
for sure.
I think we're going to do a whole Joseph Campbell breakdown at some point. I think Margaret Mead and Gregory Bateson are really important. McLuhan was mentioned a few times. He's another one.
Yeah, McLuhan. We kind of mentioned him a little bit in earlier ones on the California.
Yeah, and also we didn't get too deep into their discussion of parapsychology, but they did list almost like in a mind war kind of way, like some potential things that are being studied right now. They did mention they cited a couple times Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ, who were working at SRI on the remote viewing and ESP experiments. So they were very excited about that, and hypnosis.
Another thing that they mentioned that was weird, literally, was just to continue the David Myatt thing. They really made a point to say, this is just a quote that I took a note on, but I forgot to mention, the idea of moving from where we are not to where we most truly are is from William James, the famous pragmatist, but is well expressed in a now archaic meaning of the word weird. Anglo-Saxon weird with the Y, which is the word related to the German werden, to become, standing in direct contrast to the Indian notion of dharma or the current Western notions of socialization or conditioning, both of which see the individual as necessarily subject to the law imposed by society. Weird is an unfolding from within of what is potential. Note that this is an essential meaning of the root word educere, to bring forth as something latent, from which our word educate derives. This image of reality as, with Eliot, still point to the turning world, where the past and future are gathered, the metaphysical ground of the person, and what has brought him forth are one and the same. So, whatever, just a bunch of, woo-woo, but they love that they seized upon weird, very David
Weird,
Myatt-y,
which, we talked about weird, the 09A, is David Myatt is obsessed with the weird, the concept of weird.
Spengler connection, the weird, yes.
There's a lot going on here. I did not expect to find such, weird 09A synchronicities in Changing Images of Man, but perhaps I should have expected that.
The Idris Shah, Changing Images type people and the David Myatt connections are quite strong. But anyway, so watch out for the weird and the honor and being offered.
Yeah, they're all doing insight rolls. They can all fuck off.
For sure.
And that's it. So until next time, dear listeners, stay vigilant.
Peace.